whether or not I should recuse myself.
Planning Commission hearing for July 23rd, 2012 is now called to order. Is there any public comment for items not on the agenda this evening? See none. The first order of business we have is VR 12-01, a sign variance. A staff report has been prepared for each application that has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the chart on the wall, and that's the procedure we will follow this evening. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the planning staff before the hearing begins. Speakers will proceed in the order in which their card is received. You should fill out your address on the card so that the city will notify you of its final decision. For the public record, please begin all testimony by stating your name. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. A person may submit any written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, oversized poster boards, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they are not given to staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Planning Commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised for the consideration of the City Commission or LUBA or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient specificity and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond, the issue will not be deemed appealable to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. We will now open the record for Oregon City file VR 12-01, a request for a sign variance. Does any commissioner have any ex parte contacts or conflicts of interests?
Well, I think, like many members of the community, we go to the Oregon City Shopping Center on a fairly regular basis. So that's all I'm going to report. Been there.
Been there, done that, seen the signs.
Yeah.
I actually approve some of those signs.
I've been to the shopping center many times and seen most of the signs that are in the exhibits.
As have I.
Any conflicts of interest or bias or any other statements to declare?
No.
None? Does anyone in the audience wish to question any of the commissioners about these disclosures? Yes, sir.
Please ask him to come up so we can get it in the record.
Can you come up to the microphone and state your name?
My name is Raymond Brayton. I'm the general manager of Myers Sign Company at work. And I guess these always go a little differently, so you have to forgive us. We didn't realize we had to fill out the comment card beforehand. But I certainly wanted to comment on the paperwork that you all had sent back out from our initial meeting here where we had a unanimous.
Sir?
Actually,
This is not the
comment
testimony
time.
part.
We're asking you if you have any comment about the commissioners, and would you like to question the commissioners based on the statements we've made?
If they have any bias,
Conflicts,
conflict
right,
of
that-
interest,
yeah.
or ex parte contact.
Okay.
Okay. So then we'll,
You can take your seat.
You'll get a chance to come up
He'll
later.
call you up when it's time. He was asking whether you were challenging our ex parte contacts that we had all been to the Oregon City Shopping Center. So that's what that was about.
We will now begin with the planning staff report.
Thank you, Chair Kidwell. My name is Laura Torway. I'm a planner with the City of Oregon City. This application for VR 1201 was submitted for the Oregon City Shopping Center. As you know, is located adjacent to Highway 99E and Interstate 205. It's shown on the screen. It's within our mixed-use downtown zoning designation. The sign variance includes 3 different aspects. The applicant would like to construct the sign proposed on the screen. In order to construct that sign, we'd need a sign variance for the number of freestanding signs on site, the height of the freestanding sign proposed, and the size of the freestanding sign proposed. The applicant has proposed to install the sign on the southernmost portion of the site as shown on the map. So let's go through those sign variances in a bit more detail. The first one is the number of freestanding signs permitted on site. As you know, in our code, the subject site gets 1 freestanding sign per frontage. For the purposes of the sign code, there are 2 frontages on site. One is Highway 99E, and the second one is the Interstate 205. So there's 2 freestanding signs allowed on site. With this development proposal, the applicant submitted a sign inventory of all the freestanding signs on site, and that included 5 existing signs, and the applicant has proposed 1 additional freestanding sign, so that would result in a total of 6 freestanding signs on site. The second is the height of the freestanding sign. So our code allows a 30-foot tall sign. The applicant has proposed a 57-foot tall sign. And lastly is the size of the freestanding sign proposed. You can see on the screen our code allows 300 square feet of signage with a maximum of 100 square feet per sign face. And proposed is a total of 438 square feet, which is 219 per face, with 2 sign faces. This sign variance was reviewed in compliance with our sign chapter of our municipal code, 15.28, as well as our mixed-use downtown zoning designation and our administration and procedures section. Staff reviewed the application and found that there are 4 variance criteria in our sign code section, which the sign proposal does not comply with. So let's go through those in a bit more detail. So each of these screens, the part on the top is the actual code section, which staff believes the standards are not met for. This one says that there must be an exceptional or extraordinary circumstance for this specific property that doesn't apply to all those other properties around the site. Staff does not believe there is that case on this site. The applicant indicated in their proposal that they would like to have the proposed sign so that it's visible from Interstate 205, and that there are topographic constraints associated with that as well. Staff does not find that there are topographic sites that are limited to just this site. So if River Shore would probably have the same problem, or if they wanted to put a sign in the property behind Oregon City Shopping Center, it would likely have the same problem that would result. In addition, there are other opportunities for signage on site. The applicant can do a variety of wall signs, freestanding signs, roof signs, projecting signs, incidental signs as well as temporary signs. And then if, as the applicant stated, their intent was so that the sign was visible from Interstate 205, they can always work with ODOT to get a sign and ODOT right-of-way as well. So that's the first standard that staff believes is not met. The second standard is that the variance is necessary for preservation of a right that all the other adjacent property owners or owners in the vicinity have. And staff does not find that there is that disparity, that all of the properties around here are subject to the same side code and could do the same sorts of things. And approval of the variance would allow the applicant to do more than those adjacent neighbors could do. The third one is that the variance is not in conflict with the purpose of the sign code, nor would it limit the enjoyment of property owners that are adjacent or in the right-of-way. Staff found that there are 3 sections in our sign code that it would conflict with. These are under our purpose statements for sign code. The first is that sign is compatible with the character and uses of the zoning designation and the zoning district which is located. So the property, as we know, is in our mixed-use downtown zoning designation. The purpose of the mixed-use downtown zoning designation is pedestrian-oriented uses, and a tall, large sign is not really geared towards pedestrians. In addition, there are no other known properties within the mixed-use downtown zoning designation that have these types of signs, so it's not really compatible in that way either. The second is that the sign code is written to maintain the effectiveness of traffic signs. Staff believes that the additional signage, the large signage and the tall signage, would make it harder for pedestrians, bicyclists, and pedestrians, automobiles, to see and distinguish traffic signs. Lastly, another purpose of the sign code is to maintain and enhance the scenic and aesthetic qualities of the city, and that the additional signage may be distracting from the natural beauty of Oregon City, as well as the surrounding buildings and or the surrounding property signage. Lastly, the variance must be the minimum variance necessary to alleviate a hardship. The applicant did not provide the city with any evidence that there were other alternatives that were pursued, thus this being the minimum. Also, again, the sign code provides a variety of opportunities for signage on site, as we've mentioned before. And if the applicant is intending for signage to be visible from 205, they can always work with ODOT to try and get that as well. So, in that, staff recommends denial of planning file VR 1201. The items are listed on the screen. So again, the variance is for sign, the number of freestanding signs, the height of this freestanding sign proposed, and the size of this freestanding sign proposed. And those are just summaries of the 4 criteria which staff believes are not met, which are all of the sign variance criteria. Are there any questions I can answer for you?
Question from the commission?
I have one or two.
David?
Go ahead, Damon.
Well, the height of the sign, this might be more appropriate for the applicant, but what is it that they're trying to get over the top of with their height?
So we allow a maximum sign height.
I understand that, but why do they need it higher? What are they trying to be seen over?
That might be best for the applicant.
Okay.
Denise?
Laura, can you remind me of, are there multiple tax lots that make up the Oregon City Shopping Center property?
There is a skinny little one on the north that does not have any signs in it.
So it's like the Sherry's lot, is it a separate tax lot, or where the bank is, or where it's all one tax lot? Okay, I was just trying to remember. And as you prepared this, did you do any research on previous sign permits and applications? Because unfortunately, I seem to recall some that I may have approved. Like the one that's for the AT&T wasn't there, but where Starbucks is, which was a separate sign, and then,
We did not look into the validity of the existing signage on site.
because they're all at this point non-conforming.
There is an amortization section.
But are they non-conforming as they, under the current code?
Unless there was a variance approved for them, then they would be non-conforming. Everything beyond the minimum requirement.
We would need to go back and look and see when the sign was built, what sign code was in place when that one was built.
Well, it wasn't might not have been, it would have been, a lot of that was up before 94, because I recall where Coastal was the Emporium.
But you still have an issue of a new sign that needs to meet today's requirements and what they are.
The reason I'm asking the question is that there, as you pointed out in your staff report, there are a substantial number of signs on the site. And one of the things that may make it confusing for people to get to the Oregon City Shopping Center is there's not really an overall sign plan so that you can be directed to where you need. I mean, they're just kind of there, and I think some of the pictures that you submitted show that it is somewhat confusing. I'm not saying that that's a reason to get a variance, but one of the things that probably would help with them trying to do the new look and upgrading is to do a sign plan for the entire property so that they can see what works and what's not working. And I think that's more of an issue than additional signage.
Other comments or questions from the commission?
Did the applicant provide any additional or any other properties that were enjoying the same kind of things that they are asking for, like the sign height or the size or any of that kind of thing?
They did not.
Do you know if there are any businesses that have signs of that size at this point?
Off the top of my head, well, I couldn't think of any other property within the mixed-use downtown zoning designation that had the number of signs that are existing on site, as well as the size and the height.
Right.
In total.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see if he really can preserve a right that all the other properties have. And if nobody else has a sign this big, I don't see how this can happen. But I don't want to give it away, but that's one of the problems that I see.
Can you go back, Laura, to your first slide?
Yeah, we're not getting anything.
No, the second one, I guess. Yeah, that one there. So, according to that, as I understand it, they're allowed 2, and right now they have 5.
Yes. The applicant submitted the inventory of all the signs on site, and there were 5 of them in their inventory.
Okay, so based on today's sign code, they're already, they have 3 more than they're currently allowed. And I guess the question I would ask is, did they entertain the idea of perhaps removing one of the existing signs and replacing an existing sign with a new sign?
Or repurposing.
There is no reference to that in their application.
We'll find out here, won't we?
Okay.
We also have, as Denise referred to earlier, in 1994, we adopted an amortization code for our signs. So at that point, we gave everyone 10 years if they had non-conforming signs to utilize those non-conforming signs, and then they were supposed to be removed as well.
What year?
It was in 1994,
that
so
would have
the
been
10-year.
2004?
Correct.
I think we're kind of past that now, aren't we?
I'd say. I'd say.
But we
think-
did not look into the validity of any existing sign on site.
Is there any enforcement attached to that regulation that would require them to either remove or upgrade the existing signage?
We can enforce that section.
We can or we can't?
We can.
We can.
Dealing with signs in Oregon City has been a constant discussion that we've had, and
It's on our-
at the time of
It's on our
the
list.
amortization came due, the decision was made that we would not be moving forward with it. So that's where we're at right now.
Sure. And I guess I'm kind of thinking a little on the line of what Denise was suggesting, that if they had a master sign plan for the property, there may be a way to trade off one of the existing signs that's not conforming with a new sign that would be conforming.
Maybe. I mean, you still need to deal with
All the
that you're non-conforming as is, as you stated. They have 3 more right now than they're.
No, right now,
Per code.
they exceed what they're entitled to. The one thing I had a question is that the frontage requirement has nothing to do with the length of the property.
There's a maximum to it. So if you have a larger frontage, you can have a larger sign. But there's a maximum point, and they hit that maximum.
But the longer the frontage does not entitle you to more, a
Correct.
larger number of signs.
Correct. It's just based on the number of frontages you have.
Okay.
Of those 5 signs existing, are all 5 out of compliance or just the 4?
We didn't look at that.
It looks like from the height that all of them except for Starbucks, AT&T would be.
The applicant did provide the details of the height, size, and number. So we know the number that we're allowed to, and we did a quick analysis of the height and the size of the signs. So based on just height and size to comply.
There it is.
The essence of the staff report is the fact that they haven't complied with the meeting any hardship. They haven't demonstrated that there's any hardship by virtue of this sign.
Correct.
And that's the guts of the whole matter, isn't it, Tom?
These 4 criteria have not been complied with. Correct. And then they would have to comply with all 4 criteria to be approved.
Right. Any other, Damon?
When you refer to the size of the signs and faces, is it just an assumption that there's 2 faces? My thought is by Sherry's put a new pillar sign up that has 3 faces, one facing up towards 205 and then another facing left and right on McLaughlin. Would it be 150 per face at that point, or are they maxed out at 300?
We limit both the size of each face and the total signage. So right now they just sort of, a lot of the signs, as you saw, they split it in half. So if our maximum is 300 feet, a lot of properties will have 100 square feet per side, but so just divide it by 2, but they could divide it by 3. So if you total all 3 sides, it's still 300.
Okay, so it's the total, not 150 per face.
There's the limit per face and the total limit as well.
Just looking for creative solutions there.
So they basically exceed the number of signs and the area of signs allowed.
This proposed sign exceeds the height.
But I'm saying they already exceed both the number and the face area. So this would increase their violation of the sign code.
Unless it's approved, yes.
Okay.
Can you elaborate on working with ODOT for signage?
The city is not involved. Our sign code regulates signs that are not within the right-of-way, but the applicant stated in their application that their purpose of the sign was to have visibility from Interstate 205. And so if they wanted to get a sign in the 205 right-of-way, that is an alternative.
So you're talking about one of those blue highway signs that you see when you're driving, and they
I
have
think it's
different.
green.
Yeah, whatever font it takes,
Standard
but rather than having it on the subject site,
Right.
if they wanted to put
Right,
it in
and-
the right
And
way.
they
So
charge.
on that, they were citing the hardship as being visible from I-205.
Correct.
Okay, and I've done a couple of variances in my life, and I don't really see that as a hardship. I think that hardship is really more site-related in terms of, they have a strange shaped site, or they have topography, or they have some other kind of thing that makes it difficult for them to live with the number of signs, or the types of signs, or the sizes of the signs that they have. So I'm having a hard time seeing the hardship as you do. And so if there is no hardship and they don't meet criteria 1, they wouldn't meet criteria 4, the minimum variance to alleviate a hardship, because there is none. So,
Maybe we could hear the rest of the public testimony. and
So, any other questions for staff at this point?
No, at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's hear from the applicant.
Hi, my name is Kristen Jones, and I work on behalf of the owner of the Oregon City Shopping Center. We purchased the center about 2 years ago, so I also don't know what the scenario was when those other signs were approved. There's a couple things we just want to fill in some information from your questions to Laura. We actually have tried several other scenarios. We tried to deal with Sherry's directly and offered to, if they would take their sign down, that we would put their name on this new sign, and they were not willing to do that. Another thing that we tried to do is we tried to do Denise's idea of parceling out Sherry's separately as a tax lot, so therefore we'd then be able to do a sign on the side next to the freeway. But there would have been street improvements that we would have been responsible for in McLaughlin, and that made it economically unfeasible for us to do that. Just so you know a little bit of the history of that we actually have tried several different tactics already. We do think that we do need this visibility. As many of you guys know, when you go north on 205, you can see the shopping center. Part of the difficulty we're having is because it does sit kind of in a valley, or it sits quite below the freeway, so it's hard to see. When you're traveling north on 205, you can clearly see the Rite Aid and a little bit of Fisher's Marine. It's very obvious there's a shopping center right there. But when you're driving south on 205, you can't see it at all. You just see the back of a cement building, pretty much, and that's about it. There's approximately, I believe, 115,000 cars that come off that exit daily, and we just really feel like some kind of visibility there would draw potential customers in the center as well as into Oregon City. As owners, we've put about just under $1 million into renovating the center and really trying to have it thrive again. We just are making room right now for another anchor tenant and are in the final negotiations with a major retailer to come in and be another anchor. What else? Let's see here. We don't think an ODOT sign would be adequate. The signs that Mr. O'Brien referred to in his email, those are all for malls or shopping centers where people already know what kind of stores are in there. Our whole point is that people don't know what stores are in our shopping center, so that's why we don't feel like an ODOT sign would fit. It would just, if it just said Oregon City Shopping Center next right, I mean, people don't know what's in the center. I would say, too, that I do feel like this is a unique situation. As far as I know, there are no other large strip malls the size of ours right off the freeway in Oregon City, first of all. So I feel like it's a very unique property. It's not really comparable to any other property. And also the fact that it sits so low below the freeway, that's what's making the visibility hard. That's it for me.
This is Raymond Brayton. I'm with Myers Sign Company. And I just want to kind of address a few of the things that I read in the document that was sent out with the staff report. Kind of to touch on the ODOT, because I know there was a lot of mention to that. And traditionally, when you say Clackamas Town Center or Pioneer Square, folks know that most of their services are going to be provided within that stop. However, a shopping center, and we deal with clients all the time in this manner, that's why you see when you go to Clackamas Town Center, we don't have great big billboards of signage out there because it's a mall. Whereas at a shopping center, that's where we feel we need to have as much of the tenants noted or some sort of advertising so folks know that, hey, if you're looking for Kohl's, Kohl's is here. If you're looking for Subway, there's a Subway here. That's why we've seen on our freeways a lot of ancillaries installed, which are showing at the next exit that there's a Subway or a Sherry's or something like that, because folks were just passing right by these off-ramps because they didn't know what service was there, and they didn't want to take the challenge with the traffic flow and everything else to get down in there. And realistically, if the sign just simply said Oregon City Shopping Center, if I'm not familiar with this area or center, if I'm coming from Vancouver to Bridgeport, let's say, I'm going to pass by because I don't know what's there. And I don't know if I want to take time out of my schedule to go find out what's there and find that maybe there's nothing there that services me. As for the existing signs on the property, I believe 2 of those displays are billboards. And billboards are not regulated in our sign package because those are off-premise permits that are done with the state of Oregon. So that's a whole separate thing. They have that set up through the state. They pay annual fees to have those billboards, and therefore they can change them out, et cetera. And the billboards that are on this property aren't advertising Oregon City Shopping Center. So realistically, I understand that we have the one main sign that we did years ago on the front. But if you're coming south on 205, you cannot see that sign. In fact, you barely even see the little logo on the top by the top of the sign. So I can't read that and see Oregon City Shopping Center or the top billings of the tenants on there. And as the new ownerships come in, we have done a lot of work to change out some of the faces, clean it up, and make it more visible. But we're kind of maxed out with what we can do with that sign. Then the one that's the combination with AT&T and Starbucks. That sign really is just oriented almost just for that little use right there.
Specifically for the drive-thru, so people know where the drive-thru is that lights up at night.
And I can attest to that because when I put the faces in, I had a heck of a time. But the other things I want to just kind of mention is that, again, because of the 35-foot grade drop from 205 to where the bottom of the sign would start in the parking lot, we need 35 feet of height just to get to the level of the road. And then we need to have, some signage up above that, and that's where we did the calculations based on the existing sign to find that 57 feet, it's an odd number, but that just seemed to give us the least height necessary to get the job done. Square footage was considered in the same way. The owner of the mall actually wanted the sign considerably larger than what we proposed. But we felt that within the existing sign that's out there, this display fit the right height and readability at that scale. Again, we have an enormous amount of property owners right now coming to us for this exact same need because there's so many spaces out here available right now for a tenant to jump into that tenants are now saying, hey, I want to go into where I can get the best advertising signage value. So we are adding bigger pylons. We just redid Vancouver Mall, got Cinetopia out there for them. We've just been doing it all up and down from Vancouver clear down into Eugene. Everybody wants to have better signage, changing colors, whatever they're doing, or increasing visibility for their tenants to entice them to come in and to keep them there. The other thing is, there's a comment about the shopping center and other businesses in the area. When you've got just a single business that sells shoes or whatever, I mean, maybe a 32 square foot sign is sufficient for them. But when you're talking about a shopping center, and I don't know of anything of that scale right in that area. And I know there's gas stations and such down the way. So really, I don't think you can compare the two of those because this isn't an individual. This is a shopping center. So it's a little bit of a different situation there. And also something about issues with pedestrians or bikes. The sign is in the parking lot up towards the front. There is no bike lane or anything like that. It's just in the parking lot. And I don't think that bikes or pedestrians are allowed on 205. So I'm not sure I don't know if I understood that question. And I can take some questions if you like.
Are there questions for the applicant?
When I'm driving on I-5 and I go past, say, the Centralia outlet malls, most of those buildings are not oriented towards the highway. But almost all those buildings have little individual signs that say, Bose and Nike, and, to show where they are even in the mall, so people know I have to get off here and I have to drive down the length and pull in. And I mean, I don't know what that does for the sign code, but I mean, at least it would at least point out the big anchor retailers. Additionally, where you're proposing to locate it just seems like a really awkward spot. It would be, because driving south on 205, since this I've kind of looked, and you get, there's a couple of pine trees and stuff right there, and you're going to be already exiting before you see the sign. So it's not going to entice me to turn off of 205. If it was located more at the north end, like, on the roof over Coastal, then at least it's, where you'll see it before you pull off the 205. So I'm not all that convinced that this is the right answer, especially considering you need a variance to do it. So.
Sure, and if I could, I'll jump in on and answer that one. I'm very familiar with Centralia. I put up the booths and the big signs that you see off the freeway there. And the reason those tenants have those signs is because they were the first ones to get in there and spend their money and get them put up, and therefore took all the allowances, or there'd be a lot more there. Plus, you have to have so much feet between freestanding signs, so that I ran out of room at Centralia. But also Centralia, you see it's just like Woodburn factory outlets. The signs are done, and the design was done in such a way that it was oriented to face the freeway. And even that, at Woodburn, I just put in $1 million TV screen basically down there to help their tenants. So even with the biggest signage, sometimes it doesn't always fit. But here, in the location actually is, it's the first common area from where you've mentioned, coming away from that building. And also, we didn't want to disturb, because I know parking spaces are very touch and go. So this is a natural area that doesn't disturb any existing parking flow and or parking spaces. And the height, actually, that we're proposing in the square footage at the top, Oregon City Shopping Center, those are illuminated letters from behind. So those are going to really glow at night along with that logo up there. That's what we want people to see, is that Michael's, Rite Aid, Coastal, see that before they come, so they can make a decision if they want to get off right there, that they can. But you will see that before you hit the off-ramp. I've done a lot of walks on there. It's a lot of math.
Well, I guess I wanted to agree somewhat with Damon. I guess, Roger, I'm not buying that people go to Bridgeport and they know what's in there. You don't know. You just know that it's Bridgeport, and you might have looked it up online to see what was in there. And same thing with Clackamas Town Center. There's no way someone driving by is going to know everything that's in Clackamas Town Center. I think that you should. I think that you have an opportunity with wall signing, paint on the back, something if it's within the code, Oregon City Shopping Center. I think the idea that was proposed by Mr. O'Brien to pay for a sign on the freeway, because, Clackamas Promenade, people don't know exactly what's in that, but they still stop off. I've driven through many towns that have shopping centers similar to Oregon City Shopping Center, and I don't know exactly what's on there, but I've gone on around me and said, where's a this or where's a that? Comes up and says, go here, so you just go and you look. I just don't think that we have to notify every member of the driving public about each little business that's in the Oregon City Shopping Center. I just don't think that's the way we want to go. And I really would strongly recommend that you talk to the state about getting a freeway exit sign, because when I'm in several of the stores, usually people are getting directions and they go, get off at this exit, this is the Oregon City Shopping Center, and they know where to go from there. They get down and they can find their way. I'm not sure that having a big, gigantic sign as you come down the ramp when you're supposed to be paying attention to your roadway is going to really, I just don't think that's the solution to the issue.
Well, ironically, because that drop-off is so big, it doesn't look that big when you drive by. I don't know if there's that picture from the freeway. Is there that picture? No, we don't have it with us. at the
shot from way back.
yeah, the Citizens Council, when we approached this, we
The
had
CIC.
drawings. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes. I'm sorry, what's it called?
CIC.
CIC. When we actually had drawings showing exactly what it would look like coming off, and it actually doesn't seem big at all when you drive off there. And they actually all unanimously liked the idea. So
Well, Mr. O'Brien.
I know. Well, during the meeting, he seemed to like it. I think maybe
I
afterwards.
just think you have other. I think you have other alternatives, and unfortunately I don't feel that there really are no exceptional or extraordinary circumstances that apply to this property. That center's been there for since the 70s and
60s.
60s,
is
excuse
the
me.
largest
I was just telling
shopping center in
Damon.
Oregon. when it
Yeah,
was
and
built.
it hasn't been doing well.
Yeah, I remember I was telling Damon, I remember when the sign said, Emporium, Oregon Craft and Floral and Payless. So, I mean.
Well, I remember when it said J.C. Penney, Ben Franklin, and Grants.
Yeah, there you go.
If I could just politely
So-
remind the commission, if we have questions,
Yeah.
we should ask those questions. Otherwise, if we can
Right.
continue on, because the applicant does have a chance to come back for rebuttal.
Are there other questions from the commission to the applicant? No? Okay. Thank you for your presentation. We will take...
I'll just close with one comment
Yes, sure.
that Denise made. I am actually working currently with Clackamas County to increase the size of the signs at Promenade because they're at 45% vacancy rate right now. It's just signs, business with no sign is a sign of no business.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are there any neighborhood associations that are present to speak to this proposal?
We do have
There really is
one.
no neighborhood.
Okay.
We have one comment that was signed up for this variance. It's from Mr. Tom O'Brien.
Okay.
Just might want to remind individuals have 3 minutes, and
How do I close what's there? Tom O'Brien, Oregon City. I am a member of the CIC. Can you help me close that? Sure. Whatever. I am a member of the CIC.
Just a reminder to those that are testifying, we have a number of people here tonight, so we'll be going with a 3-minute limitation on testimony.
I was unfortunately out of the country at the time this was presented to the Citizen Involvement Council, so I did not have an opportunity to give any input at that occasion. However, I have put together a summary of some thoughts in the written testimony. But I wanted to add a little bit to that, and it follows very closely with what Damon and Denise have indicated. However, I think it's important from a signage standpoint. Signs can be very positive for business. They can really draw business in when done properly. The largest sign association in the country for independent sign companies is the United States Sign Council. They have put together a number of educational types of documents that help people to understand what's a good sign and what's a money-wasted opportunity. In this case, one of the things that they show in their rules of thumb is on-premise legibility. If it is not a large enough letter or a large enough area, or the letters are too tight together, it does no value. You just simply cannot see it, okay? Going down a little bit further in what they're talking about, they talk at 40 miles an hour, which is what the speed limit is along McLaughlin. A motorist traveling at 40 miles an hour has a distance that they can see that sign from. Once they recognize there's a sign there, they've traveled 58 feet. That's on a per second basis. At 60 mile an hour, which is most of the traffic going on 205 is doing, even though it's 55, they're traveling 88 feet per second. Okay? I won't get into a whole lot more. That document is available in my testimony tonight. There are some charts at the bottom of it that point how large your letter style has to be as far as it being legible from that area. What I wanted to get into is some aerial photographs showing things in question. The arrow here indicates where the sign placement is being requested. This shows if they were coming from the south, heading northbound, this arrow once again is the placement. This would be the least possible chance that you would have to exit the freeway heading northbound to catch the ramp to 99. I point to this because this is a tractor-trailer rig. The maximum tractor-trailer rig allowable in the Oregon is 53 feet long. If we round that off to 50 feet and we stack up from this point to this point, 11 of those end to end, you've got a distance of 550 feet. Okay? There's also something I should have shown on the other one called a cone of...
You need to click it again, yeah.
Click it 2 times. It's like Dorothy.
It's open here already, excuse me. Never mind. If we're looking at either exit, this is where you'd have to get off to go if you're heading north. This is where you would have had to have already made your decision to make the exit ramp, and I'll show you that in a minute. So Damon's comments about putting rooftop signs or something of that nature along this area, as you're coming down here, you have sufficient time to get off at the exit after seeing a large sign from that distance. This is the composite of the applicant's photo and rendering. If you would recognize this tree, these low bushes, and this tree. I'm also going to show this sign in a further one, and this sign indicating 1 right-hand turn and 2 left-hand. This is approximately where he was standing when he took that photograph. He wasn't on the ramp, but he was near to it. This is the sign or the area where he was standing. Notice the bush here, the taller tree here, the low bushes, the other tree, and this is that left turns and right turn area. This is actually a visual from this ramp that comes onto southbound off of 99E. This is where it joins 205. You see the visual right now of a very large sign that only has one tenant's name on it, significantly larger letters than what the applicant is requesting on his sign. This is the point further north, at the point where you leave the highway to get into the exit lane. It's quite a distance. And this is where the sign would be placed. This, you can see the solid line and the broken line. You have to be over there by the time you get to that solid line, or you're not going to make that exit. There just is not any way possible that you can see the size of the lettering that is being proposed in the applicant's. So he's wasting people's money, quite honestly. Damon's comment, we do allow signs across the back of here on the roof. It's a perfect answer, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Any questions?
No, thought it was very informative.
Are there any other people with testimony?
There's not.
The applicant wish to make a rebuttal?
I guess not. Going once?
You're okay?
I guess the only thing
I'm sorry, you need to come up, please.
Calm down.
I guess the only thing I would state there is that, first of all, I don't believe many of our cities allow rooftop signs. When I say a rooftop sign, we're talking about a structure that comes out of the framing of the roof and goes projecting like a big pole sign right up off the roof.
Like the Made in Oregon sign.
Very good, yes. Also, as far as square footage, we're already asking for an enormous amount of extra square footage over the 300. And we've done we live underneath what the gentleman was showing us. That's how we design most of our products. It's based on ISA and different types of documentation. So we know that the scale at which we have it is visible. Now, you saw in that picture, that was Sherry's sign. So obviously, this sign is in front and higher than Sherry's, therefore giving the center that advertising. It actually was nice to see that you could see the sign, because theirs is much shorter. So.
Also, just to clarify, just some misinformation is that there's actually 25 tenants. We weren't planning to put all 25 of those, just the 4 anchor tenants. So the signs would be very easy to see. They wouldn't be the example of the smaller signs. Also, we're not trying to get people to come off the freeway coming north on I-205 because they can already see the center. That's not our concern. Our concern is people that are already coming off the exit, for them to know what stores are right there, so that right there they can take a right. Just to clarify, because obviously someone can't, see it and turn around. Our goal is to get the visibility coming south on 205 that's already headed that direction off that exit. Just to clarify.
Okay, thank you. So, do we have any more questions for staff? Damon?
Just to, I guess, clarify the question about rooftop. Do we allow rooftop signs? And then also, do we allow, I guess, what I was referring to in my comments was like store backing signs where it's on the building, on the back face of the building, wall signs. And what's the requirements for that?
We do allow wall signs. We allow twice the length of the total wall for signage. So if the wall is, I'm just making up a number, 100 feet long, you would get 200 square feet of signage on that wall. We don't distinguish tenant space. And then also we do allow roof signs. You get 1 roof sign in place of a projecting sign or a freestanding sign.
So they would run into an issue because they have freestanding
Frame
signs.
signs.
Yeah, and it's the same with the roof sign is still part of your sign allowance.
Right.
Okay.
I had a question. The applicant mentioned that the billboards are not on their property. Are those included in the total number of square feet of signage?
They are included in the inventory given to us from the applicant of the existing signage on site, and the city does regulate billboards.
Okay.
You can't have any more.
Any other questions for staff? Okay. Discussion.
You want to close the public hearing?
Public hearing is closed. Discussion on commission.
Well, I guess I'll start. First, yeah, I agree that Oregon City Shopping Center needs more visibility. I met Governor McCall there once when he was running. It's got history, and it used to be the largest one until darn Lloyd Center came along. As somebody who's lived here for many years, seeing vacancies and empty parking lots is kind of disappointing. It is the gateway from the north end of our city, and so having it being busy and thriving is useful. But that being said, we already have existing rules and regulations, and I'm not sure that, well, I am sure from what I've heard tonight that the hardship to get the variation hasn't been proven at this point. I agree with Mr. Meyer's comment about the pedestrian issue. I don't really think that's a valid comment because it's not a pedestrian area. It's mixed use downtown. Yes, downtown on Main Street is pedestrian, but your shopping center isn't. But that still leaves the other 3 issues, and so I'm just at this point not convinced that enough evidence is here to overcome the need for a variance, at least with this current proposal. So,
Denise, you want to go next?
Oh, I guess I want to say that I understand the issue of visibility, but I'm not sure that bigger is going to be better. And I know the owners of the shopping center want a big, giant Herkin sign, but I guess I'm not feeling that that's really the answer. And just for your comment, I think that the shopping center has made some strides to make it more pedestrian friendly, because I see people crossing back and forth from the hotel all the time. And if there was more pedestrian walkways within the center, you get more people walking over there. But I think that variance criteria is very, very tough to meet. And you have to meet all four. You can't meet just one or two or three. You have to meet them all. And I concur with the staff recommendation.
I think there's a lot of its identity that's tied with it being the Oregon City Shopping Center, and that its strengths are certainly aligned with who is in that shopping center. But I think that if that identity was embraced more and pursuing an ODOT sign reflecting that, along with embracing the walkable aspect of what is local, I concur with staff.
Paul?
I also concur. And again, to echo some of the additional sentiment, I think the Planning Commission understands the need for signage, and we're always up against the issue of hardship and meeting the criteria versus the quality of the project and the need. And we might think that this is a good project, and we do, or we might think it's not. I don't think that's the case here. I think that there is a real important need for this kind of sign to help the economy, Oregon City's economy. But unfortunately, we're up against the issue of not liking or disliking, but finding out whether or not this meets the criteria. And again, it unfortunately doesn't. And I agree with others by saying that another look at the sign plan in that shopping center should probably be done so that there's a better design out there.
Robert?
What concerns me is the scale of the project and the public safety factor involved in all those movements of interchanges and stoplights and driveways coming in and out of the shopping center, and pedestrians and things of that nature, and the decisions you have to make to miss something. So my concern is basically one of public safety. And I don't think the criteria for variance has been met. I think the sign is way out of scale. And if it were to be functional, really functional, then it'd have to be 10 times bigger than this one, which just conflicts with the public driving habits and things of that nature. So those are my thoughts on it.
Well, I concur with what Denise and Damon were saying, that if the objective of the sign is to draw people coming from the southbound direction on the freeway, the sign really does not meet the need of getting people off the freeway at that off-ramp. And perhaps the state signage would be more appropriate. I know from personal experience, when I've been traveling in an area that I'm not familiar with, I look for those blue signs that have the little tags on them for restaurants and gas stations and things, and I take that as a cue, usually way before I've seen the shopping center sign. I think that the proposed sign is not going to be visible until you're past the off-ramp, and perhaps a wall-mounted sign or a roof-mounted sign would be more effective. I do also concur with the idea that since the current shopping center already exceeds the signage regulations, that a big picture look at the signage on the site would be appropriate, and perhaps make some arrangements with some of the other signage holders to reduce the number of signs on site. I personally think, I've lived in Oregon City for over 30 years. The one thing that strikes me about that site is that there's no shortage of signs. In fact, if anything, there's what I would call signage clutter. So sometimes too many signs just becomes a lot of visual noise. So I would concur with staff recommendation that there's not enough support for this ordinance to be passed. Do we have a motion?
I would make the motion. I just wanted to add to your comment. I think one of the issues that we have here is that we have several anchor tenants, and everybody's got their sign, and nobody would want to give it up, or nobody would want to, say, well, gee, I'll look at helping to resolve this. So maybe, what is it? Mediation is the word. That,
the negotiation needs to happen.
That needs to happen. If they came up with a sign plan and they could show to the other folks what a benefit it would be to everyone, maybe they could get some concurrence. And I know that that's tough because I've dealt with folks up at the Berry Hill Shopping Center, and dealing with the grocer there was not a picnic. It was a little difficult. So I'd like to move that the application for VR 1201 be denied as per the staff recommendation, that those findings be adopted as such.
We have a second.
I second.
Question?
Commissioner Mabey?
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff?
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Espy?
Aye.
Commissioner Mahoney?
Aye.
Chair Kidwell?
Aye.
All right. Planning file VR 1201 is denied. 6-0.
It's a tough criteria.
Question for you, Tony, is our sign ordinance anywhere on the horizon, or is it, with all the concept plans and everything, still it's stalling on the counter, but it isn't ready to hit any burners yet?
Right. We did receive funding in this fiscal year to begin looking at the sign code. It won't happen before 2013.
Right. I do kind of agree that part of the problem they've got is a mall situation, or what we're looking at of retailers, multiple retailers in a small area, does make our current sign code almost unworkable for them, and so that might definitely be an element that maybe call them in as a partner when the discussions begin to see what we can do with that.
I think there'll be plenty of opportunities for input on rewriting of the sign code.
Wasn't there zoning as straight commercial prior to the MUC, which there were different, as I recall, there were different, Paul, maybe you can help me remember this.
Folks,
there were different,
I think we'll have lots of opportunity to talk about the sign code.
Okay,
we need to move it.
Trying to respect folks' time. One thing is, you may have noticed that none of the attachments are coming up on your...
Right.
So we've made copies of the staff reports for the remaining 2 items. If you would like exhibits, we'll bring them up on the screen, and you can toggle back and forth, and we can bring those up off the internet if necessary as we move forward. So just wanted to give you that, why we put these paper copies in front of you as this is going on.
Okay.
Wonders of technology.
So we'll move on to
When they work, they work.
AN 12-04, annexation of 0.9 acres with the urban growth boundary, low density residential. I'll read the legal description or legal script for this AN 12-0. A staff report has been prepared for this application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. The staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the chart on the wall, which will be followed this evening. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the planning staff before the hearing. Speakers will proceed in order in which their card was received. You should fill out your address on the card so the city will notify you of its final decision. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed by the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. A person may submit any written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, oversized poster boards, reports, pictures, or other exhibit used in their oral testimony to be placed on the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they are not given to the staff, they will not be included in the report. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Planning Commission makes a decision in which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised for the consideration of the City Commission or LUBA or both, without raising the issue on the record with sufficient specificity and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond. The issue will not be deemed appealable to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of the approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issues precludes any action for damages in circuit court. We will now open the record for Oregon City File AN 12-04, annexation of 0.9 acres within the urban growth boundary. Does any commissioner have any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or other statements to declare?
None.
None.
No, I don't.
And then,
I do have a question for Pete. Am I having deja vu on this application?
No, you're actually seeing it again.
Okay. I am having it. You should have said, yes, you are.
Did you get that from Yogi?
So, yes. Annexation 1204 is an annexation of 0.89 acres. It's submitted by Sissel Engineering on behalf of the owner, Gary Bowles. It's located at 14362 South Maple Lane Road. And I meant to put...
Pete, if I could just interrupt real quick. So
Yeah.
I didn't hear any ex parte
Yeah.
conflict of
Right.
interest. Okay.
And no one's visited the site or have you?
Well, yeah, I've been by there since when we heard it before, but I haven't been.
But there wasn't an official site visit where
You mean we
invited to
walked
go?
on the property or no?
No.
Thank you.
and we're all vaguely familiar with this because we heard it once before.
Correct.
Yes.
Is that our ex parte that we heard it before?
Sorry, we're biased now.
Is there anybody in the audience that wants to question the commissioners on their declarations? Seeing none? We'll continue with the staff report, please.
This exhibit before you is Exhibit 1F, which is the tax map. I'm meant to insert this exhibit directly into this slide right here. So anyway, it shows the location of this property is contiguous with existing city limits on the southwest side of the property. This property has been within the urban growth boundary since 1979, I believe. It has a comprehensive plan designation of, let's see, and it was applied for in 2011. That file was 11-03. It was approved by the City Commission based on a recommendation from the Planning Commission. However, the annexation was not approved by the voters, and subsequently the annexation was not completed. And annexations that do not survive a vote of the people are required to resubmit and go back through the land use process again. It's one tax lot of approximately 0.89 acres. There's an existing site with one house and some outbuildings. There are no wetlands or water resources on the site. It's accessed by two driveways on Maple Lane Court. There is sewer, water, and storm sewer available in Maple Lane Court and Maple Lane Road. It's a low-density residential comprehensive plan designation. It has a current Clackamas County zoning designation of future urban 10. And the property has been within the UGB since 1979. And if the annexation is approved by the voters, the property may be zoned to the city's R10 single-family residential designation. The only thing that has changed about this application since the previous application was submitted in 2011 is that the transportation planning rule has changed to be more specific. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. The property is contiguous to the city, and annexation of this property would not create any county islands. And no development is proposed at this time. Complies with the transportation planning rule, which is Oregon Administrative Rule 660-12. And the transportation planning rule was revised to provide that properties that have a comprehensive plan designation, and that comprehensive plan designation has been accepted and acknowledged in a city's adopted transportation system plan, and there's been no change to that designation since that transportation system plan was adopted, are not required to show further compliance with the transportation planning rule. Under the previous application, the annexation had been reviewed for transportation planning rule compliance under the old rules, and was also found to be compliant then, based on these designations. So that hasn't changed at all, although the rules have changed. It's still transportation planning rule compliant, and that means practically that the city may zone it to R10 upon annexation approval by the voters, because we have a city code that allows for corresponding zoning designations to be rezoned for low-density residential to R10. This slide shows the property aerial photography with 2-foot contours. It's relatively flat. You'll notice the property is right at the corner of Maple Lane Road and Maple Lane Court here. This is the current zoning surrounding the site. Oregon City R10 zone to the south and east, and you'll see Highway 213 over here, and then there are city R35, R8, and other residential zonings very close by. So R10 zoning would be compatible with any adjacent zoning. However, utilities on the property, what this map does not show is the current Clackamas River water line that serves the property. This shows city water lines and city sewer lines and city stormwater facilities. So they are nearby the property, but they are not directly at the property, and any development of the property would have to extend service lines to serve this property. It's about 0.89 acres, which is less than an acre, and if they were to divide this property for residential use under an R10 zone, they could really only realistically divide it into 2 properties based on the shape of the parcel. And at that time, they'd be responsible for paying all system development charges and connection fees, as well as extending sewer and water to the development. So it is unlikely that it will develop in the near future. With respect to the approval criteria that the Planning Commission and the City Commission must consider, these are called factors, and as relevant to the annexation proposal, and I accidentally included the old file number up here, I apologize. This is AN 1204. The factors include consideration of adequacy of access to the site, conformity of the proposal with the city's comprehensive plan, adequacy and availability of public facilities and services to service potential development, compliance with the applicable sections of the Oregon Revised Statutes 222 and Metro Code 3.09, any natural hazards identified by the city, such as wetlands, floodplains, or steep slopes, any significant adverse effects on specially designated open space, scenic, historic, or natural resource areas by urbanization of the subject property at the time of annexation, and lack of any significant adverse effects on the economic, social, and physical environment of the community by the overall impact of the annexation. We've analyzed the impact of this annexation on city services and determined that these factors have been met. Any impact to city services are not a direct result of annexation, but we have reviewed it in terms of its potential zoning to R10 and determined that it would not have a significant impact on city services. The police, fire, and emergency services to this property have been judged to be adequate, and the city police department did not comment on this annexation, and due to its small size and due to the fact that Maple Lane Court is already served by the Oregon City Police Department, so they patrolled down to the end of Maple Lane Court to the existing city properties there. And the code provides that the city commission shall only set for an annexation election any annexations consistent with a positive balance of these factors. Included in your packet are Exhibits 1 through 9. Exhibit 1 is the application itself. Exhibit 2 is a review of the previously submitted transportation analysis by Replinger and Associates dated December 22nd, 2011, which is still valid because it's less than a year old. All the public notices that were provided, including the newspaper public notices, mailed public notices, transmittals to the neighborhood associations, proof of meeting with the neighborhood associations, etc. The transmittal comment form that was used to forward this towards the relevant agencies and necessary parties that are needed. So all of the county agencies and districts which were provided notice of this application. A signed affidavit of the posting of notice by the applicant. A copy of the city's urban growth management agreement with Clackamas County, which provides for mutual planning within the urban growth boundary. A copy of Metro Ordinance 7977. Exhibit 8 is our proposed findings, reasons for decision, and recommendation. And Exhibit 9 is the comments from the Clackamas River Water, who have no conflicts with the application, but do recommend that when water lines that serve development of this property are extended across the site, that the site be removed from Clackamas River Water jurisdiction and annexed into, when it's annexed, it will become city water, put on city water. So with that, on page 22 of the staff report, staff has prepared a recommendation. Staff finds that the proposed annexation demonstrates a positive balance of factors as set forth in section 1404-060, and based on the study and proposed findings and reasons for decision for this annexation, the Community Development Director recommends that the Planning Commission determine that the first determine that the proposed annexation demonstrates a positive balance of factors as set forth in the code. Second, recommend that the City Commission adopt the staff report with exhibits and the attached proposed findings, reasons for decision, and recommendations. And thirdly, recommend that the City Commission set annexation 12-04 for election on the November 6, 2012 ballot at their next meeting on August 15, 2012.
So just follow up, we are, as you may recall from the last annexations you saw in the emergency request, that we are clarifying that there are two separate actions that need to occur. The Planning Commission only needs to take one of those, and that is determining if a balance of the 7 approval factors have been met and make a recommendation to the city commission to whether that has happened or not. That is the land use part of this decision. The city commission, should they choose to make the same finding of what your recommendation is, and if that recommendation happens to be approval, we would come back with a separate resolution setting the hearing date. So these are two separate actions that occur. The land use decision on these 7 factors are what's appealable to the Land Use Board of Appeals. The resolution is a charter requirement to set an annexation date if these factors on the land use component on the land use part are met. I would also like to point out that when it comes to seeing this again, these are private property owner driven annexation requests. The city is not out annexing properties nor looking to annex properties. If a private property comes in and submits an annexation that meets, and the Planning Commission and City Commission find that of these 7 factors, they meet those, then they do need to, and they make a positive finding, then it goes to a vote. And that's where the land use part of the regulatory review ends, and the political part of the vote of the citizenry takes over on these annexations. So that's why you see this again. And it's up to the property owner if they're willing to invest that time and money to try and do this again and take it to the electorate, should you still find that the land use approval criteria on balance are met. So I would just request that you do focus on what the land use part of this is. And it is frustrating for some that these keep getting sent back up to the ballot, but our job and this commission's is to look at the land use component of it, and the politics are a separate issue that are addressed through an election.
Thanks, Tony. Does the commission have any questions for the staff?
I have a question for you then, Tony. Then the recommendation number 3, which we recommend that they, since that's supposed to be a separate action, how can we recommend that they set an election? I guess that I'm hearing a little conflict in what you just said versus what that says.
We could certainly remove that and take it as the separate resolution. We could remove recommendation number 3.
Okay.
Other questions for the staff?
I was just curious. This is part of the enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District, and then it'll be annexed to the city of.
Correct. That's right.
Oregon City's Police Department.
Yeah.
And then Clackamas River Water District to Oregon City's Water District.
That's correct.
And then is the street inside the city, or is it in Clackamas County?
The north side of the street is not within the city. And yeah, the annexation will need to bring in a portion of the right-of-way of Holly Lane.
Okay.
Holly or Maple?
Maple.
Sorry, Maple Lane. I beg your pardon.
People in Hollywood.
And the Urban Growth Management Agreement provides that at some point the city will take over all of the jurisdiction of that right-of-way, and then it gets improved up to a city standard when development's proposed.
And that happens under a separate action, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It happens under a city commission action. I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all I've got.
Okay. Any other questions for the staff? Thank you. Pete? We have the presentation from the applicant.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Tom Sissel, address 375 Portland Avenue, that's Gladstone. To my right is Gary Bowles, the owner of the property. And he'll have a few comments to make after I give my presentation. I guess probably the question, even though it might not necessarily be technical in terms of your hearing, is why is Mr. Bowles coming back? And we feel that the voter's pamphlet did not do Mr. Bowles any favor the last election. It placed, I believe, the other controversial applications map directly across from his verbiage of his application. And we feel there was confusion, and we hope to make much clearer with the new application, a new vote, that Mr. Bowles' parcel is less than 1 acre, less than 0.9 acres. And that's why we're coming back to the commission, and the planning commission and the city commission, to put this back on the ballot again for November. For the technical aspects of this application, I wish to point out, as I did in the original hearing, I've got them, yes, that if you look at this parcel here is the only parcel within the block between Maple Lane Court, Maple Lane Road, and Beaver Creek Road that is not presently in the city limits. To add this parcel to the city would actually reduce the length of the city-county boundary interface. It would shorten it some amount as the boundary is doing a regular jog to get around this parcel. As was noted, water is currently serving the site. Sewer is very close by, and it's logical to bring this parcel into the city to, first of all, put this parcel and the entire block within the city's boundaries, so you have a logical break of city streets to separate this city land from the county land. The testimony of Mr. Walter indicated that this parcel under R10 zoning could reasonably have 2 lots, and I concur with that, but I think in full disclosure I should note that under this parcel is over 30,000 square feet. Theoretically, it might be able to get 3 parcels under R10 zoning, but due to the unusual configuration, the triangular shape, and all the frontage that would have on both streets, it's probably unlikely unless the city sometimes revises their R10 zoning to even make it more flexible than it is today. But I wanted to let you know that theoretically it could have 3 lots. So we would hope that the Planning Commission will forward a recommendation to the City Council to recommend approval of this annexation again. And with that, I'll have Mr. Bowles say a few words here.
My name is Gary Bowles, owner of the property. When I moved there, I was in the country, and now I feel that I'm already in the city, so why not get the city utilities, and it'll increase the value of my property, and that's basically why I'm trying to get annexed. Other than that, I'm just ready to move on. Years, been there long enough. That's about all I have to say.
Commission have any questions for us?
Any questions for the applicant?
No?
I have one. Is the septic system in failure at this point, or is it about to fail?
No, it is not.
Okay. I mean, I guess it brings forth a larger question about properties with failing septic systems and what happens with those, but we'll ask that later.
I've dealt with that in the past, and it's one of the reasons I want to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other
Yeah,
questions?
I have
for
a
the
question for Tom. So, Tom, what's changed?
What's changed?
Has anything changed?
Nothing has changed. The parcel's still the same size. It's still surrounded on 2 sides by city boundaries. We still wish to bring the parcel in. The utilities that were there previously are still there today. Is there a specific reason you're asking that question?
Well, it's not really up to us to approve an annexation. That's really belongs in the, as Tony so eloquently stated, it's the public's domain. So I was just wondering if there was something that had changed.
I think the change is yet to come. I think that when it gets time to put on in a voter's pamphlet, we will try to make very clear this is less than a 1 acre, 1 acre annexation, so that it cannot be confused with any other annexations. I know that there's some other annexations that are going through the process. I don't know how controversial these other annexations would be, but when this thing gets to the voters' pamphlet, we wish, and we'll make clear the small size, where it's situated, and so forth.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you. Is there anyone from the neighborhood association? Thanks.
There are no public comments submitted for this
No public
application.
comments?
None at
Thank
this
you.
time.
So we will close the public hearing. Is there any discussion with the commission?
Well, I'd just say that this is a lot like the annexation we had last week, where we're closing the gap. It's about as contiguous as you can be when you're over 3 sides, and it just makes sense to close that gap. So I don't see any issues with this. I know it was unfortunate the way the fights were going on with the other annexation at the same time, so hopefully that'll be avoided this time around.
Denise?
I guess I have a question for staff, and maybe this is more policy related, but if you have a small property that has a failing septic system and they need to come into the city, do they have to go out and have the voters approve the annexation?
Yes, they do.
And if they still have a failing septic system, is there any kind of a stopgap or interim measure by which they can connect to city sewer while that process is underway?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
So if you're within, per DEQ and state requirements, if you have a failing septic system and you're within 300 feet, we extend public sanitary to you. So what happens when you have an emergency annexation? It actually skips the planning commission and goes straight to the city commission for their consideration. But because there is a charter requirement with no exception for safety hazard situations, it still needs to go to the vote of the people. If we work to simultaneously provide the sanitary sewer, the applicant, the property owner, works with our engineering department. They pay the bill to extend the service to their property, and they hook up. Simultaneously, we run the application and get it on the next available ballot for that annexation. If it does fail, we do have an option of what's called an extraterritorial extension of the sanitary service to alleviate the safety hazard. So there wouldn't be a situation, if the vote fails, we still address the safety concern, and we deal with getting the city limit line moved if it does fail at a later date.
And they get assessed the SDCs, and they're on Oregon City's billing.
Correct.
Even though they're extra-jurisdictional.
Correct.
I guess editorial, but I think that there really should be some relief for the smaller, less controversial annexations that have a septic hardship, that they not go through the voting public, if they're able to, because I think that results in if the public isn't really well informed of an annexation like that and they vote it down, and you do a bunch of those, you're going to have a lot of extra jurisdictional connections out there that you're going to have to keep track of, and it's
that's the problem with making knee-jerk reactions where you change the charter, just like what's going on with our water thing. The city has screwed us, so let's change the charter so they can never do it again, and instead everybody else gets screwed.
So let's.
And yes, that's my editorial comment too.
Let's focus back on this application.
I just want to point out, in respect to your question, that in the 2 emergency annexations that we just processed through City Commission, there's no rezoning or redevelopment proposed with either of those, and they're both less than an acre. So it's not like some sort of a development proposal that's going to happen without city approval, because they're still going to have to go through a rezoning process, and they're still going to go through a development review process for any redevelopment of those sites.
Any other discussion?
You were just asking specifically about potential health hazard annexations versus whether this property had a health hazard, because
I
he
don't
said
want to
he...
descend into another...
Okay, no, I'm
subject,
just trying to understand why you were asking that question, because it didn't, he said there was nothing wrong
There
with the
wasn't
septic.
anything wrong with the
Okay,
septic,
all right.
but, you know,
Yeah.
I guess this could be part and parcel to
Sure.
smaller and less controversial annexations.
No, I get it. I'm with you there.
Not being burdened and not being expensed with this kind of a process where I get the idea of annexing and having voter annexation for larger parcels that have a higher burden to public services and may have real impacts to the city versus some of these smaller ones that have to go through this expensive process. Just me.
Well, you know, a lot of little small ones add up to a
I
cumulative
know.
thing, so anyway.
Incrementalism, right.
And that's
let's get to the vote.
Anyway.
That's not on our agenda.
That's not on the
yet.
agenda for tonight,
We
or
don't- We don't have the
subsequent
authority
night.
to make that decision anyway. Do we have a motion?
I move approval of AN 12-04 with staff recommendations 1 and 2.
Second.
Chair Mabee?
Aye.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Mabee. Commissioner McGriff?
Oh, Chair me?
I know.
Oh, I missed that.
Sorry, I apologize. Commissioner McGriff?
There's a coup happening, Charles.
I noticed.
I'm going to abstain from this, as with my vote at the previous annexation. Rather than vote no, I'm going to abstain.
All right. Commissioner Henkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Espy?
Aye.
Commissioner Mahoney?
Aye.
Chair Kidwell?
Aye.
All right. Motion passes.
We're going to take a brief recess. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes. Now for our featured attraction of the evening.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have to excuse myself from the proceedings here, because I think there might be a potential conflict of interest involved.
You got a lot there you got thought?
I got a cousin sitting out in that audience.
Oh.
And
Okay.
her mother was my aunt. All right. So I'm going to go sit in the audience,
The poor minute taker.
You have to wait.
if it's okay.
Well, you have to wait.
How about you do that when we declare?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
So
Okay.
Robert's going to do him up.
So we are going to proceed with TP 12-01/VR 12-02, Crabtree Terrace 2, 30-lot subdivision variance request from alley requirement. I have read the quasi-judicial hearing script a couple times this evening and seen no new people joining the audience. I will dispense with the reading of that for this item. Just a reminder, though, that those wishing to speak either for or against this proposal.
Excuse me, Chair, I think you should just run through it one more time. I'm sorry
Read
to...
through? Okay,
Yeah.
no problem.
To be a stickler for that.
Do you have the pros and cons separated out? Because usually you have the pros and then you got the cons.
We don't have any convicts here.
Do we?
Okay, I will go ahead and read the script. A staff report has been prepared for this application and has been made available 7 days prior to the hearing to the public. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the chart on the wall, which will be the procedure we'll follow this evening. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the planning staff before the hearing. Speakers will proceed in the order in which their card was received. You should fill out your address on the card so the city can notify you of its final decision. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. A person may submit any written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, oversized poster boards, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they are not given to the staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Planning Commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised for the consideration of the City Commission or LUBA or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient specificity and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond, the issue will not be deemed appealable to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issues precludes an action for damages in circuit court. We will now open the record for Oregon City File TP 12-01/VR 12-02, Crabtree Terrace 2, 30-lot subdivision and variance request from alley requirement. Does any commissioner have any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, or bias, or any other statement to declare?
I think I might, Mr. Chairman. With respect, I would ask that I be excused from the proceedings.
Yes.
Thank you.
So they know they have a time limit?
Any other commission?
No.
None.
None.
None for me either. Just a reminder to those giving testimony from the public, we are limiting testimony by the public to 3 minutes per person. So if you would respect that, that would be great.
Challenges from the audience.
Oh, that's right. Do we have any comments from the audience or questions regarding the declarations by the commissioners? Seeing none?
Is somebody running the shot clock there? Or do you have control over that? Okay. I didn't know if Charles had the power and he could just...
I'm poised to say your time's up. So we'll proceed with the staff report.
I wish I could keep this to 3 minutes, but I'll do my utmost not to go over 15.
Talk fast.
Thank you. This is file numbers TP 1201 subdivision and VR 1202 variance. Applicant is AKS Engineering and Forestry of Sherwood, Oregon, and the owner is John Jones Construction Incorporated of Oregon City. The request is a approval of a 30-lot subdivision and a variance from the alley requirements of Oregon City Municipal Code, Chapter 12.05, Sub 255, to allow direct garage access to local streets in the R3.5 dwelling district. This property is located at 14616 Maple Lane Road, identified as Clackamas County Map 32E4D, Tax Lot 700. My name is Pete Walter. I'm Associate Planner, and I prepared the staff report. Subject property shown on the preliminary plat here before you is R3.5 zone, single-family residential district. It allows attached or detached dwellings. The site itself is approximately 4.3 acres in size. There's a schematic map of the proposed subdivision here in color. That's Exhibit 9, page 37. And this map actually shows the proposed subdivision with hypothetical buildings on it, as well as sidewalk locations and street trees. This is the 30-lot layout that the applicant has proposed. Existing conditions on the site are shown in this aerial photograph from 2011. The property abuts the urban growth boundary and city limit on the east side. Property to the north is also owned by the applicant, or at least it was, until a lot line adjustment that was recently approved, which created the northern boundary of the subject site. That site is vacant and zoned R35, so the property does not have direct frontage on South Maple Lane Road.
Can you put your, I think it's the one,
Sorry.
your cursor on that one?
Yeah, this north property
Okay.
line here.
Okay.
And this property here to the north, was the subject of a lot line adjustment, which is also an exhibit in your packet. Set up the property here for the current application.
And you said that the property that the cursor was on is not owned by the applicant?
I believe not. I believe it's under a different LLC now.
Okay.
Right, which is a different owner. That can be confirmed with the applicant. Property to the south, directly to the south, is known as Crabtree Terrace Number 1. The subject property in the proposal before you is known as Crabtree Terrace Number 2. Property to the west is R6, the Walnut Grove and Walnut Grove Estates subdivision. And properties on the north side of Maple Lane Road here are county. The purple line is the urban growth boundary. Hey, excuse me, Holly Lane comes in and joins Maple Lane Road about here, where the city limit is on the north side. And then the Country Village development is County R7 is over here. The applicant has submitted what's known as a shadow plat in 2007, and this is useful for showing hypothetical development of the site and surrounding property. This was submitted. This shadow plat was submitted when Crabtree 1 was submitted in 2007. The red outline that's shown here is where the existing subdivision is, and that's useful for referring to as we go through this presentation as well. A shadow plat is a connectivity analysis that shows how adjacent properties might redevelop. It's non-binding on the applicant and non-binding on the city, but the city uses a shadow plat to determine whether or not it's feasible to make streets connect through and what kinds of lot patterns might be apparent on a property in the future. So that's what that's for. In your packet, the applicant included what they call the chronology or project milestones. And this is an excerpt from that. It's a timeline of the development approvals starting in 2007. And Crabtree Terrace Number 1, to the south of the subject site, submitted a land use application which was approved as a Type 2 subdivision. They applied for a grading permit on the subject site on July 31st in 2007, and their grading permits for both Crabtree 1 and grading permits for Crabtree 2 were approved around about August 2007. A grading permit can be applied for independent of any land use approval in Oregon City, and subsequently the applicant applied to the Public Works Department for their grading and fill permit to move dirt around on the site in anticipation of development of Crabtrees 1 and 2. And then in their subdivision plan was, for Crabtree 1, was recorded in 2008. And in July 31st, 2009, the city code changed to require alleys in a number of different zone districts, including the R35. And so between what the applicant terms phases 1 and 2, the code changed, and the current application was applied for in March 22nd of this year. And the grading permits for both of these properties are in your packets. Subsequently, staff was not able to approve a subdivision without alleyways as a staff level approval, and the applicant was advised to apply to the Planning Commission for a variance from the alley requirement. And they've provided a lot of justification in their application. I've tried to summarize it here for the subject variance request. They applied for a fill and grading permit on the subject property, and those permits were obtained and completed in good faith. The applicant was unaware that the code change could occur. The site dimensions, geometry, existing grades at the edge of the site make the provisions of alleys impractical. They feel that the existing development and street stubs set up for the site under Crabtree 1 approval set up the site for a logical block pattern without alleys. And they also felt that the alley requirement would have unintended and undesirable results. Specifically, they go into detail in their application: the difficulty of preparing flat buildable lots, the loss of outdoor rear yards, and additional impervious surfaces. Prior grading of the site, which was approved as an Exhibit 9, page 23, it looks pretty much like this today. You can see where the cursor is where Crabtree 1's boundary is. And then the applicant did a rough grading for a series of benches. And the approximate location of the current north boundary line of Crabtree 2 subject application is where my cursor is here. And so the applicant did rough grading in expectation that they would be able to do a subdivision without alleyways, similar to what Crabtree 1 had done. And the large black arrows here show the approximate flow directions for storm water and that sort of thing. The approval criteria that I've outlined in the staff report include all of the subdivision and zoning approval criteria, but I'm going to concentrate on the variance criteria only. The variance criteria that we prepared responses to are as follows. Under Oregon City Municipal Code 1760-030, a variance may be granted only in the event that all of the following conditions exist. Firstly, that the variance from the requirements is not likely to cause substantial damage to adjacent properties by reducing light, air, safe access, or other desirable or necessary qualities otherwise protected by this title. B, that the request is the minimum variance that would alleviate the hardship. C, granting the variance will equal or exceed the purpose of the regulation to be modified. D, that any impact resulting from the adjustment are mitigated. E, and no practical alternatives have been identified which would accomplish the same purpose and not require variance. And finally, F, the variance conforms to the comprehensive plan and the intent of the ordinance being varied. So the first criterion is that the variance is not likely to cause substantial damage to adjacent properties by reducing light, air, safe access, or other desirable or necessary qualities otherwise protected by the zoning. And in summary, the R3.5 zone requires a minimum lot size of 3,500 square feet. The applicant has proposed lots for single-family detached homes averaging 4,300 square feet, and those would provide for a 15-foot rear setback. The applicant has met the minimum density requirements required in the code for at least 30 units on the site. The larger setbacks that the applicant proposes under this zoning would promote light and air. They proposed safe access through the use of detached sidewalks, combined driveways. And as far as pedestrian access goes, they are also proposing to do curb bump outs between, at the ends of the blocks so that pedestrians can cross between sidewalks more quickly at the ends of those block lengths. The reduced impervious area and larger rear yards would be desirable to residents of the subdivision. So staff found that that variance criteria was met. And I'm summarizing here. Detailed responses are in your staff report. Criterion B is that the request be the minimum variance that would alleviate the hardship. So the applicants demonstrated that the application of the alley requirement in this case is a hardship because the site geometry and dimensions, boundaries, existing drainage situation, utilities, street stubs, grade changes at the edge of the property, and prior grading work preclude implementation of the alley requirement. The overall site dimensions and the street studs did set up a logical lot pattern with Nutmeg Lane running north-south and the proposed Purple Ash Way and Oregon Iris Way running east-west through the site. At the time the applicant proposed Crabtree 1, the city code was not set up to allow for phasing of subdivisions. We had a master plan process for industrial and commercial sites that might want to redevelop over 20 years. And apart from that, there was no real subdivision phasing allowance in our code. And the applicant did explore the possibility of phasing verbally with staff on numerous occasions, but we said, you can't do it. We have a 2-year land use approval and a year extension, and that's what you have to go with. So the applicant went with Crabtree 1, went through a staff level approval for that, and got it. They had wanted to complete both Crabtree 1 and Crabtree 2 as 2 phases, but due to economic conditions could not complete them. They also feel that the alley requirement would result in various undesirable and unintended consequences, which I addressed already, lack of flat lots, loss of rear yards, and increased impervious surfaces. And they provided a detailed analysis of those conditions throughout the site, including maps, where they superimposed various alley scenarios on top of the subdivision to see whether or not it was practical to do so. And they've put bullet points on those maps to show where they felt it was impractical to do that. And in all cases, I felt as staff that they had provided compelling reason why it was not practical. So criterion B is complies as proposed. Criterion C, the variance needs to equal or exceed the purpose of the regulation that needs to be modified. Now, the Oregon City Municipal Code does not include a specific purpose for the alley requirement. It states that alleys are required in certain zone districts, and it also provides for a turn radius at the ends of the alleys. However, when the alley requirement was adopted, it was to provide primary rear access to off-street parking, as well as provide for an attractive, less automobile-dominated streetscape and a safe pedestrian environment, as well as to provide adequate space for utilities, space for street tree plantings, and on-street parking in our higher density residential developments, including R2, multifamily zone, R3.5, which is the zoning, and R5. Also in the MUC1 and MUC2 zones and the neighborhood commercial zones. So those are all zones where alleys are currently required. The applicant has proposed wider lots of 50 feet on average that are twice the minimum required width in the R35 zone, along with combined driveways. The applicant has provided photographic comparisons of alley-loaded development with on-street parking and traditional driveway development. The applicant indicates that there would be 120 on-street parking spaces with adequate space for street trees and safe sidewalks. So, on the balance, staff feels that yes, the variance would equal the purpose of the regulation to be modified because the streetscape, as proposed by the applicant, is still safe and pedestrian friendly, especially considering combined driveways, and wider lots that allow for planter strips between the driveways to create adequate space for street trees and utilities. So criterion C complies as proposed. Criterion D, any impact resulting from the adjustment are mitigated. The applicants proposed adequate mitigation in the form of wider than typical lots with combined driveways. They proposed setbacks that would be more typical of a larger lot. Now, that would be addressed when a building permit comes in on these sites, but given the types of homes that John Jones has been building in Crabtree 1, it's reasonable to expect that they will maintain the larger setbacks that are permitted in that zone. Those setbacks would provide an attractive and safe environment and place for residents to enjoy. There will be sufficient on-street and off-street parking, and there will be adequate space for uniform street tree plantings. So we felt that the impacts resulting from the variance are mitigated. It's the same slide. E is no practical alternatives have been identified which would accomplish the same purpose and not require a variance. So the applicant provided a written and graphic analysis in Exhibit 3A, Roman numeral 3, and Exhibit 9, which indicated the impracticality of providing alleys on the subject property and how the application could not accomplish the objective of street-accessed single-family homes without the use of a variance. And finally, F, that the variance conforms to the comprehensive plan and the intent of the ordinance. So the comprehensive plan has a number of relevant goals and policies that are pertinent to this variance and subdivision application. Our comprehensive plan is implemented through our zoning and subdivision ordinance and through the applicable approval criteria, including public noticing requirements, housing, provision of public facilities, and transportation analysis. The applicant has demonstrated compliance with all of these criteria, and additionally, the variance is in accordance with comprehensive plan goals 2.1, which is efficient use of land, 10.1, which is diverse housing opportunities, and 12.1, which is land use transportation connection, and the relevant policies as described in the staff report. There are a number of exhibits which I wish to enter into the record that were not available at the time the staff report was prepared. The first two of these are before you, which I made photocopies of. Our transportation consultant, John Replinger of Replinger and Associates, had noted that the transportation analysis lacked any crash data, so we couldn't make a determination as to crash data safety. And the applicant did provide that addendum. And the addendum letter provided by the applicant was dated July 18th, and it provides information on crash history for the 4 key intersections identified in the transportation impact analysis. The applicant's engineer concludes, and John Replinger concurs, that the crash history identifies no safety issues that require additional study or mitigation. And in anticipation of not receiving this information, we have prepared a recommendation for a condition of approval to provide it. But given the information before us tonight, that condition of approval 16 is really not relevant to the application, and the Planning Commission may determine that it can be removed if they're satisfied that the crash data analysis and mitigation is not necessary, or at least the mitigation portion of it. Specifically, the crash rates for the 4 study intersections are summarized in a table prepared by the applicant. The crash rates greater than 1 crash per million entering vehicles are generally indicative of a need for further investigation and possible mitigation. The intersections analyzed were Beaver Creek Road at Maple Lane Road, Thayer Road at Maple Lane Road, Walnut Grove Way at Maple Lane Road, and Holly Lane at Maple Lane Road. And in all cases, the crash rate is below that threshold and does not require additional mitigation or analysis. The third exhibit and fourth exhibits tonight are letters submitted by residents of Holly Lane, a letter by Jane Davidson in opposition to the application, which is Exhibit C, and a letter from Chuck Hodson of Holly Lane in opposition to the application, which we noted as Exhibit D. So staff has recommended approval with conditions. Staff is happy to answer any questions about the staff report that you might have. I did not go into detail with respect to the comments that were submitted previously by Christine Kaczynski, but I'll be happy to address those briefly right now. Christine Kaczynski had provided 2 separate sets of written comments as well as verbal comments during the prior public hearings for this application, which have both been continued to the current date. Ms. Kaczynski's concerns address a variety of issues associated with proposed subdivision and development, including public comment and noticing requirements, safety of Holly Lane, cut-through traffic, traffic impacts in general, lack of parks, livability, transportation, landslides, erosion control, police and fire services, and other concerns. Holly Lane is, at least the portion that is not annexed into Oregon City yet, and none of it is within Clackamas County jurisdiction. The northern portion of Holly Lane is within the urban growth boundary and has been concept planned but has not been annexed into the city. So it is not within the city's urban growth boundary, and the city of Oregon City has neither the authority nor obligation at this time to require any party to make off-site improvements to Holly Lane. The applicant's traffic impact analysis was reviewed by our transportation consultant for conformance with the city's adopted transportation system plan and our level of service requirements, and was found to be adequate. And those findings are presented in the staff report and exhibits. Staff has reviewed both sets of comments submitted by Mrs. Kaczynski, and we determined that they do not specify whether any public notice requirement, subdivision zoning, transportation, public facilities and services, or other adopted approval criterion or criteria has not been met, or which cannot be met through application of staff's recommended conditions of approval attached to the staff report. The applicant has also prepared a separate responses to Ms. Kaczynski's comments dated June 29th, 2012, which is in your packets under Exhibit 12. So with that, we're recommending approval of the variance and the subdivision with conditions. The conditions of approval are standard conditions of approval which would be applied to any subdivision. They primarily have to do with following through on what the applicant has proposed in terms of right-of-way dedication, engineering requirements, non-remonstrance agreements, provision of public easements, and all those sorts of standard conditions of approval that staff writes when we write a Type 2 land division approval. And so we've prepared those for your consideration this evening. You may approve with conditions or deny the application. You may also modify any recommended conditions of approval that we've provided for you if you feel that they need to be done in order to meet the intent of the code and better implement the zoning ordinance.
Thank you, Pete. Does the commission have any questions for staff?
I do. When was the grading permit for Crabtree 2 submitted?
Let's see.
Because Crabtree 1 was done in 2008, correct?
2007.
Or was it 2007?
They were submitted approximately the same time, but the grading permit for Crabtree 2 was actually released just prior to the grading permit for Crabtree 1. I believe the reason for that was because they needed to do some cut so that they could move dirt from Crabtree 1 to the site of Crabtree 2.
Okay. I'm not familiar with Oregon City's process on subdividing and
Yeah.
So is it common practice to do the grading before the subdivision's approved?
It's not common, but at the time this was proposed, it was permitted.
Okay. All right.
So can I ask I just want to be sure, because I wrote something different in my note. You said that there was a rough grading permit, or there was rough grading done to the site. So does that constitute a grading permit, and did they actually do all of the grading for that?
Yes, they did. Yeah.
Okay. So that would lead up to my next question is, so the applicant then graded the site at his own risk in anticipation that he was going to apply for something that he didn't then apply for until now.
That's correct.
So he basically, it would appear that he may have created his own problem or hardship. And I'm sure that the attorney's probably going to answer that. You also said that in your staff report that the applicant was unaware of the code change. And I would presume that the typical process that we use by putting public notices in the paper, notifying the public, CIC, all of that, so an applicant or someone in this community, including myself, could have known that there was a possible code change.
Yes, it's a legislative file.
File, yeah.
And per measure 56 has to go to every property owner in the city. Yeah.
Right. I do remember that. So then I guess another question I would have about that is, you made a comment about the shadow plat and that it's not binding
That's
in
correct.
any way. So this is just something that somebody could show the city that's fairly typical, but again, it's not binding on either party. We didn't say, yes, you can do this. It's just, because I have a something that came out with the land use application transmittal in May that shows a whole bunch of other properties surrounding this that look like they've been
Maybe
preliminarily divided, showing what could possibly be.
Sure.
So then my last question has to do with I understand what the intent of the requirement for alleys, and I think when I was doing my research, we have approved some other subdivisions that have.
Yes, the Merriweather subdivision was approved with alleys where practical.
Yes, right.
There was some of the sites where they abutted existing developments did not lend themselves to putting alleys in that. So
It can be done. Obviously.
It can be
yeah.
done. Yeah.
And I think what I saw in the code was that the intent is that we were trying to look at a different pattern of development to minimize all of this on-street parking and to try to, I think what some of us planners use in the vernacular is try to eliminate the whole concept of having a development that has snout houses, and that the cars would be tucked in back away. And
yeah, I didn't address, the other kind of code requirement for actual construction of homes. We have a residential site plan and design review process, which regulates garages and how far they project in front of the home, as well as the width of them. So that's a separate requirement that comes in during the building permit process. I think I didn't mention this, but I do recall that during the review of the Sequoia Landing subdivision, a lot of the R2 developments that were going in, there's clearly a need for rear access on those narrower townhome subdivisions that were coming in at the time, so that probably lended impetus to the desire for the code change as well. And it has been used in other zones, R3, 5, and R2, since it was adopted.
Thanks, Pete.
Sure.
Damon?
Just real quickly, the shadow plat,
You want me to go back to that?
if you could.
Yeah.
Just to confirm, I did a quick count, and it looks like the shadow plat showed that they could have put 41 units in this.
Within this red line?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, they're proposing 30 at this point, so.
Yeah. They did a calculation of their net developable area, and then the way that our minimum density requirement works is once you've calculated the net density, or the net developable area, which excludes easements and right-of-ways and other public utilities and things, storm ponds, then you divide it by the minimum lot size, and you end up with 100% density. And you take 0.8 of that, and you end up with 80% minimum density. And they just hit it at 30
Okay.
lots. Yeah.
So 30 would really be the
30 is the
minimum for that
minimum
site.
for that site.
Okay.
Yeah. 29 would not meet it.
Other questions from the commission? I had a question that's kind of a follow-up to Denise's question. Crabtree 1 was developed in, from what I could see there, 2007, 2008.
Still developed, yeah.
And that lot layout was developed with no alleys. Was the code, was there a variance at that time to eliminate the alleys for
Well,
that?
the
There was
alley
no alley
requirement wasn't in the code.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah, it changed after that.
So the shadow development was laid out at a time when the alleys were not
Correct,
required.
right, yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that. Any other questions for staff? Thank you, Pete. Thank you. So we can hear from the applicant at this time.
He's probably going to need that now that you closed it down.
Yes.
Screen off.
Because it's just so he's got a lot of papers. I said, you have a lot of papers, so you need a lot of room.
He always does.
Is that going to work?
I got my file too.
Hi, Chair Kidwell, members of the Commission. My name is Michael Robinson. I'm here on behalf of John Jones, the applicant. John's sitting next to me. The way we thought we would do this tonight is to have me make just a very quick introduction, that I'd like John to testify, and then Monty Hurley, who is John's engineer, is going to come up, and we're going to go through the approval criteria. And just as Pete did, we're not really going to spend any time on the subdivision approval criteria. I think those are fairly straightforward. If you have questions that haven't been answered or that you think of, please ask us. We'll be happy to answer them. But for the most part, it seems like the issue with this application is a variance, and so we'll spend our time before you tonight talking about the variance, if that's okay with you. And Mr. Kidwell, I will try and answer some of the questions that Commissioners Maybe and McGriff asked, and maybe it would be helpful later on, and I'll get to that.
Thank you.
But why don't we begin, John? What we thought we'd do is just ask John to tell you why he wants to build it this way, and then Monty and I can put it more in approval criteria format for you.
My name is John Jones. I live at 1699 South Bradley Road, Oregon City. We've owned this property for 18 years, and we had cows on it. We had hay we put up on it, and it's taken 18 years to get the annexation from 213 over to this section. So we've spent an awful lot of time and energy getting annexations in. We started Crabtree 1 in 07, and I realized that we put the grading application in for 2, but I didn't realize that the economy was going to fail in 08. And I have no backing. It's just my wife and I that are holding this thing together, and we're trying to complete the subdivision as we started it, and trying to keep the housing the same for the people that live in Crabtree 1. You've got several letters, I believe, that was turned in that they're afraid that of different issues of changing the complex plan that we've started with, and we're just trying to make it look the same. If you've been through Crabtree, it's a very nice subdivision. It's probably one of the cleaner ones in the area, and we're just trying to maintain that whole scenario.
Thanks, John. Mr. Kidwell, with your permission, we're going to have Monty come up now. We'll go through the approval criteria.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So maybe before Monty comes up, let me, if it would be helpful to you, I'd be happy to try and answer or give our answer to the questions that Commissioner McGriff and Maybe asked. And Commissioner Maybe, or Mr. Kidwell, if I could ask Commissioner Maybe a question. You noted that the shadow plat, which I agree is not binding, and something that's typically required to show you how it relates to surrounding properties and through streets, could have 41 lots. Was there a particular, just
It was just an observation that he put in a 30, but he had a layout for 41.
Right.
So that's not.
Okay, thank you. Chair Kidwell, Commissioner McGriff had a few questions. We're required, the first one had to do with hardship. 1760030 contains the 6 variance approval criteria. And sub B requires that the variance be the minimum that would alleviate the hardship. That's the single criterion where the word hardship is used. Unlike traditional variance language, and in fact, unlike many of our neighboring cities, there is no prohibition on granting variances where the applicant created the hardship. So I wouldn't disagree with Commissioner McGriff's analysis that we view the hardship as the need to create alleys. In part, the reason that is a hardship is that we've graded the property pursuant to an approved grading plan issued by the City of Oregon City. But the fact that that might be characterized as a self-created hardship is not relevant to your code. The code does not prohibit approval of a variance that has self-created hardship. So maybe let's just start out, we agree, we did the grading. And I think that leads to the second point. The city, John came in with the application in April 2007 for Crabtree Phase 1. He submitted the grading permit in July of 2007. By 2008, he gets or late 2007, I can't remember which, Pete, he gets Crabtree, I know I've shut down your computer. He gets Crabtree Phase 1 approved. Now, remember, the code changed in 2009, and again, Commissioner McGriff is right. Everybody gets notice. That's state law. And he could have come in for an application, but we were in the midst of the worst recession in 50 years. You weren't going to get money for a single-family subdivision. If a bank was crazy enough to lend it to you, they'd take it back because no one was buying lots or houses. So I think two things can be fairly said to be true about this. One is he didn't have any idea that you were going to adopt a code that required alleys in every circumstance in the R3.5 zoning district as well as others. And we can talk in a moment, in fact, we intend to, about alleys. I also have a graduate degree in city planning. I agree that alleys are a wonderful urban planning tool, but not necessarily in every situation, and that's why you have a variance process. And that's why we work, by the way, so hard with staff to give staff enough evidence that they would recommend approval of this. But my point about the timing of this is, yes, he could have submitted an application, and we all know lots of people race code changes to get an application in. But in 2009, it wouldn't have made any sense. You weren't going to get any construction loan. Even if you got that, you'd create lots that people could not get loans to buy. So the reality is, whether John wanted to construct Crabtree Phase 2 in 2008 or 9, he couldn't do it because of the economy. He had it graded. He certainly intended to do it, and that's the reason we told you about the grading. The reality is he couldn't have done it. And so the code changed, and he's now faced with 2 relatively small subdivisions, one built without alleys, and the next one, the smaller of the 2, that would be required to have alleys. And as we'll tell you in a minute, you can't even do alleys on all of the lot rows because you'd be asking him to build an alley that hangs out either to the urban growth boundary or on the edge of a cliff. So the only place you could do alleys, if you require that, and we hope you don't, but the only place that he could is in the middle row of lots. So you've got one middle row of lots with maybe 20 lots on it in 2 phases of a subdivision with over 100 lots. It just doesn't make any sense, and that's what John was trying to convey to you. He'd like to finish the way he started. In order to get there, he needs to ask for a variance, and he understands the hurdle he has to get through that. We watched you deny a variance earlier tonight. That also is why, Chair Kidwell, we continued the hearing twice, so we could make sure we had as much evidence as we could possibly have that made sense for the variance criteria. Commissioner McGriff said when doing her research, she found that it could be done, that others have been approved, and said, quote, it can be done. And again, she's absolutely right, but I don't think I've encountered any other jurisdiction, and I'm happy to be proven wrong about that. I don't think I've encountered any other jurisdiction where every lot in every subdivision in a single zoning district has to be served with alleys. That's your policy choice. You can certainly do that, but that means it must work for every subdivision, regardless of topography or what's next to it or where streets would connect or anything like that. Well, I think this is an appropriate candidate for a variance. And we recognize, as I said a moment ago, the difficulty with a variance. But we also think it's important to finish the subdivision the way that John started it. And that's why we asked for a variance. Now, if I could, Chair Kidwell, I wanted to ask Commissioner McGriff a question. She'd be kind enough to answer it, and she doesn't have to. You said you did other research. Is there information that would be helpful for us to hear before you decide based on your research?
I only researched Oregon City subdivisions.
And I'm just wondering what you found that would be helpful to us tonight.
The two that Pete mentioned were,
okay.
I was looking to see whether other subdivisions in that zone had been approved with alleys, and some of those, as he pointed out, he answered my questions to make sure I was looking at the right things. Yes.
Okay.
So
thank you very much. And the last question she asked is about the intent in the code. There is no intent statement in your code regarding alleys. There's just a straight requirement that alleys be provided in this zoning district and others. Now, Pete, and we'll talk a little more about this as well, Pete provided some helpful context to the alley requirements. But one thing I'll tell you, and I brought the page from the Park Place concept plan, the genesis of the alley discussion, according to our conversation with Pete and Tony, was the Park Place concept plan. The only place, alley, that's a large document that you're familiar with, alleys are mentioned once. The only place alleys are mentioned are with multifamily dwellings, not with single-family dwellings. So the genesis may have been with multifamily dwellings, but the City Commission, as the legislative body, decided it was appropriate that alleys be provided with all types of dwelling. But I just want to make the point that there is no intent statement in the zoning ordinance. We have to infer from legislative history and from what staff believes to be the case what it is. So that is what I wanted to say, Chair Kidwell, about those questions. Hopefully that was helpful. We agree with the staff report findings. There is nothing that we would change or ask to be made different. We agree with all the recommended conditions of approval. As Pete said, John Replinger has received the crash data from Lancaster Engineering. So if you choose to approve this, you don't need to impose, I think Pete said, all of condition of approval 16, the portion that would require supplemental submittal of crash data, because you now have that in the record. That's in a July 9th. And I think Lancaster Engineering's data was submitted July 18th. John Replinger's email came back to Pete dated July 19th, and that's in the record before you. One other thing I wanted to do before we get to the criteria, and I do this in part based on the testimony that Ms. Kaczynski offered, both oral and written. So I suspect we may hear some testimony about the development in general, so I thought I might preempt that and just address that very quickly. As Pete's told you, this is a 30-lot subdivision. It's in the R3.5 zoning district. The site's properly zoned. Single-family dwellings and lots are allowed outright in the zoning district. It's not a conditional use permit. So the point I wanted to make about that is this is not a discussion about use or what the zoning should be, or should it be less or should it be more. In fact, we could do more lots if we wanted, but one of the reasons John decided on the number of lots, which meets the minimum density, is to have wider lots, so there was more separation between driveways. In terms of traffic, John Replinger has looked at the crash data. He's found that none of the 4 intersections that were studied have more than 1.0 accidents per million entering vehicles, which, as Pete said, is the threshold for an intersection that needs to be studied in more depth. This subdivision is going to generate, I think, about right around 300 trips, I think, on the shy side of that, according to Lancaster Engineering. Their estimate is that you'll generate about 23 morning peak hour trips and about 30 afternoon peak hour trips. The staff report at page 18 contains Mr. Replinger's findings that all study intersections operate within the city standard, which is level of service D. Now, Clackamas County has a higher standard. It's level of service E. But you're not concerned with their standard. You're concerned with your standard. And all of these intersections operate according to the standard that your city has established. He also found that there's no adverse effect from having alleys. It won't have an adverse operational or safety impact. That's found at page 5 of the staff report. Let me talk about traffic just a moment, because I know people are concerned about traffic, even though during the recession traffic has actually declined, but we're back in a growth period, we hope, and it's probably going to go back up. The TIA contains a fairly thorough analysis of traffic impacts of the subdivision, and Pete said that your traffic engineer, John Replinger, reviewed the traffic impact analysis and found that it It studied traffic in the way that he hoped it would, and he concluded that the intersections will operate acceptably. So what I wanted to tell you is a little bit just about what the 3 of the 4 intersections, and I didn't include all of them, but I included 3, the number of trips this application will add in the morning and the number of trips it will add in the afternoon, what the level of service is, and what the volume to capacity ratio is. And I'm going to give you an example of the percentage of trips that this subdivision will add to an intersection. So in the morning at Holly and Maple, this application adds 7 new trips. Maple and Walnut, 23. Maple and Beaver Creek, 15. In the evening, it adds 8 at Holly and Maple, and these are the peak hours, 30 at Maple and Walnut, and 20 at Maple and Beaver Creek. In the morning, all of the volume to capacity ratios of those 3 intersections I just mentioned are all less than 0.77, which means you have about at least a quarter of the capacity left. Holly Lane and Maple Lane has a volume to capacity ratio of 0.18, so 4/5 of the capacity of that intersection is still available to us. Holly operates at level of service B in the morning. Maple and Walnut operates at C. Maple and Beaver Creek at C. In the afternoon, Holly and Maple operates at B. Maple and Walnut operates at C. Maple and Beaver Creek operates at C. Now let me give you one example of the percentage that this application adds to an intersection. I'm going to use Maple and Beaver Creek because that's the busiest of the 4 intersections studied. And this information is found at the TIA at page 22. That intersection during the PM peak hour, just the 1 hour when it's busiest, has about 2,700 trips, 1,800 trips. It gets 20 from this subdivision. That's less than 1%. So if the subdivision is approved and built with 30 lots in 2014, which is when we expect it to be done, if you, and these numbers that the TIA included are projected out to 2014, you'll have less than 1% more trips going through that intersection than if this weren't approved. So I understand people are concerned about traffic. I'm anticipating that they'll talk about it. But the point I wanted to make to the Commission early on is that we have a traffic impact analysis that looked at the impacts, concluded that your city standards are met, your traffic engineer evaluated it, reached the same conclusion, and as a practical matter, it adds very few trips during the AM and PM peak hours. It adds very few trips as a percentage of the very busiest intersection. So, and I apologize if I'm anticipating testimony that won't occur, but it seems to me that it likely will. This application isn't about the zoning or about the use or about whether it should be in the city or about traffic. The site is properly zoned, the use is allowed, and John went to the expense and time to have a competent traffic engineer do a traffic study. Your staff has looked at it and found that the traffic standards are satisfied. So, sorry that took so long. Let me talk about the variance approval criteria, and Monty's going to just jump in as he deems appropriate. First, we've said, and Pete relied on this to a great extent in the application, this really is a continuation of Phase 1. Now, we acknowledge there is no phasing process in the city code, but nevertheless, that's clearly what John was trying to do. He rough graded the site, he cut in the streets, he benched it, and his intent was to build the same kind of subdivision in Phase 2 that he built in Phase 1. John's one of the fortunate developers. He held on to his land. He's ready now to come back and build. A lot of developers weren't able to do that. And he wanted to do the same product. As Pete noted, John builds these homes. He doesn't have an alley-loaded product. Now, sure, he could go out and buy a plan. That's not the people he markets to. He doesn't have any experience building that. So that's another reason, and we've used that in our variance approval justification. That's another reason that it's appropriate to take a look at a variance through a variance process and determine whether alleys should be required in every circumstances. If you find that we've given you evidence that we meet the approval criteria, you can allow us to build a subdivision without alleys. But John's intent was to continue what he'd done, build the same product, and that's what the folks who live in Phase 1 would like to see in Phase 2. We've already said the reason he didn't do it. I mean, he went to the trouble of grading it. If you spend money on something, you want to get a return on that investment, is the recession. He graded it at the same time, not only because it made sense, because you could balance the cut and fill and the dirt on the site, but he intended to develop it. But for the recession that occurred, he would have submitted the application. Had he been able to do it, he would have done it before the code change took effect in 2009, and we wouldn't be here. I'd also note that the record contains 9 letters signed by 11 persons supporting the variance request. Most of them go into some detail on why they don't think alleys are appropriate here, and I'd encourage you to read them if you haven't. And Pete, maybe before rebuttal, I could take a look, please, at those 2 letters that were submitted tonight. And I don't need to do it now, but I can do it later. So let me now finally get to the approval criteria. And what I thought I would do is read the variance approval criteria and then talk about it. And I think this is probably where Monty's going to want to jump in. So we have 6. The first is that the variance from the requirement is not likely to cause substantial damage to adjacent properties by reducing light, air, safe access, or other desirable or necessary qualities otherwise protected by this title. What we're seeking is variance to the requirement for alleys. We hope to build street-loaded subdivisions. Pete's staff report goes into more detail than I want to go into, but we believe that there won't be any substantial damage to adjacent properties. In fact, we think there would be more damage if the alleys were required. But as Pete said, this subdivision without alleys, we get less pavement, we have more yards. In fact, we have backyards. If you have alley-loaded products, you will not have backyards. You're going to have a garage in your backyard. And people don't worry about who's in the alley. With streets, you have eyes on the streets. With alley-loaded subdivisions, you have an issue with who's back there. Now, lots of subdivisions do alleys successfully, but that's not what Pete would like to do, and that's not what the folks here would like to see continued in Phase 2. I'd also note that we don't have any adverse traffic impacts, and as Pete noted in the staff report, we propose to construct bump outs at the corners to make it easier for pedestrians to cross the street. I don't think they're going to have any great difficulty crossing a street in a 30-lot subdivision in any event, but bump outs make the distance for crossing narrower. And the analysis of that criteria is found at pages 33 and 34 of the staff report. Monty, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Not at this time, Mike.
Okay. Criterion B is that the request is the minimum variance that would alleviate the hardship. The hardship is having to develop and build homes that are different from the first phase, and in this case, requiring them to be alley-loaded. As I said earlier, John is the builder of both the first phase and this phase. He doesn't build alley-loaded product. He wants to sell lots with backyards to the same kind of buyer that has bought homes in Phase 1. And I think he would tell you if he were up here that his buyers want backyards, not alleys. And in fact, I think we would all agree it's appropriate to have backyards. Now, we know that it's appropriate to have alleys in places. But this just isn't one of them because of the history of this site. As I already noted, the variance criteria doesn't contain a provision addressing self-created hardships. We've already agreed that John created the grading. He did it in good faith. He got caught by the recession, and that really set the stage for what he'd like to do here. And now he needs to ask for a variance because of the code change. Criterion C requires that granting the variance will equal or exceed the purpose of the regulation to be modified. The purpose of the regulation to be modified is the alley requirement. The purpose is straightforward. It's simply a requirement that alleys in each subdivision in this zoning district as well as others be provided with alleys. To talk about the purpose statement, you have to infer information that's actually not in the code. But Pete's done a good job of providing that in the staff report. At this point, I'm going to do, I may wait on that. Street-loaded subdivision will achieve the same purpose as would an alley-loaded subdivision. We're going to have adequate parking. 30 lots means we're going to have about 120 off-street parking spaces, 2 in the garage, 2 behind the garage. Plus, staff noted we'll have about 120 on-street parking spaces. Driveways are going to be more widely dispersed because of the wider lots. We think pedestrians will be able to safely walk through here. I think it's a given that in most single-family subdivisions like this, there's simply not an issue with pedestrian safety. Maybe as you get into more dense projects or multifamily projects, it's certainly more of an issue because you have more driveways, more cars, more people, but this is a relatively low-density subdivision. We have safe pedestrian routes. We have attractive streetscapes. The concept plan, the schematic that Pete showed you at the beginning of the hearing shows that we intend to plant street trees. And we have adequate sight distance in the subdivision, which means there shouldn't be blind spots. We agree that alleys are an important urban planning tool, but not at this site. Criterion D is that any impacts resulting from the adjustment are mitigated. The staff report at pages 38 and 39 does a pretty good job of describing that. We don't think there are adverse impacts from not having the alleys. so we don't think there's an adverse impact to mitigate. Criterion E requires that no practical alternatives have been identified which would accomplish the same purpose and not require variance. And one of the things we did while the hearing was being continued is that AKS looked at a bunch of different schemes. Those maps and descriptions are in the record. We hope you've had a chance to look at them. But the reality is, in order to try and do what Pete's purpose is in the subdivision, there's not really an alternative that works very well. And let me just show you something if I can. I said earlier that if you were to require alleys where they would be appropriate, and we're hoping you're not going to require alleys at all, there's really, the audience, I'll hold this to them. I know they can't see it very well. This is in the record. This is a drawing prepared by AKS. It really shows two things. The shaded area is the additional impervious surface we get by having alleys, and you can see it's fairly substantial. But here's what's more important. This is the center set of lots. That's what you could reasonably do the alley on. You're not going to get it on the periphery on the UGB or the ownership, and you're not going to get it here because that's adjacent to Phase 1 of Crabtree Terrace. So the most you would get are 8 lots, or the most that would be reasonable to do are 8 lots in the middle of a 30-lot subdivision. It simply doesn't make any sense to do that. It makes sense to do alleys where you've thought it out, where you want to do it, where you've got a product to build for an alley-loaded lot, and where you want to market to that. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and it doesn't make any sense in terms of the variance approval criteria, where you've got Phase 1 that isn't based on alleys, you've got this that's on the city limits, the UGB, a non-ownership over here, a developed area over here, and it's simply not possible to do alleys except in this very small area. So you'd have less than a third of the lots doing alleys. The last criterion is that the variance conforms to the comprehensive plan and the intent of the ordinance being varied. And to some extent, we've already covered this by inquiring as to whether the variance would achieve the same thing as the regulation being varied. But what I want to do is read from an email that Pete sent us that I think helps us understand a little more about what the city was trying to achieve with alleys. And then I'm going to hand to Mr. Conkle the page from the Park Place concept plan, the only page where alleys are mentioned, and they're mentioned in multifamily housing. And again, the reason I bring that to your attention is it's our understanding that that was the genesis of the alley legislative discussion in the city. But when it started in Park Place, at least, it started just with the intention of providing them with multifamily dwellings. Pete's staff report contains relevant comprehensive plan approval criteria that is met if the variance is granted. I'm also going to read from an email dated earlier this year from Pete to Monty, and this talks about the legislative history leading up to the adoption of the alley code. Pete wrote that the stated intent of the code change at the time as presented to the Planning Commission was to, quote, improve mobility and reduce obstacles to on-street parking. Well, in this case, if that's the legislative intent, if that's what you're trying to achieve with alley, that purpose is met here as well. The mobility is not impaired. You'll have good pedestrian and vehicular access, and there aren't obstacles to on-street parking. There's plenty of opportunity for on-street parking in this subdivision. Pete also wrote that, quote, there was not a lot more discussion regarding the value of alleys in these higher density districts. It was commonly accepted that it made good sense to design denser subdivisions to be more pedestrian friendly and provide more spaces for on-street parking. We agree with that, but that's our point. It probably fits much better in a more dense subdivision or a more dense zoning district rather than at the tail end of a single-family subdivision already graded for single-family street-loaded lots. So I'm going to hand that. I don't know if this is in the record, but Mr. Kidwell, I'm going to hand this to Mr. Conkle as well.
It would be new. It's not in the record yet.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry it took so long to go through that, Chair Kidwell. This is important to John. We understand how difficult it is to get a variance, but we hope we've done everything that we could do to put in evidence to demonstrate to the Commission that the variance is justified in this case. We were pleased that the staff recommended approval, was comfortable with the conditions of approval, and we'd ask you to approve the subdivision application with the variance to not require alleys. If there are questions that you want to ask, Monty and John and I are here to answer them. Todd Mobley with Lancaster Engineering, our traffic consultant, is here as well. Please ask them before you close the record. We'd like to do our best to answer everything that you want answered. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Does the commission have any questions for the applicant? Damon?
Well, two. First, did you breathe at any point during that presentation? Second, you mentioned 120.
Is that good or bad that I...
You went quicker. You mentioned 120 off-street parking. You said 2 in the garage and 2 behind the garage. I assume you meant in front in the driveway portion.
Thank you. I'm sorry I misspoke. You're right.
We were talking about alleys, and that's how you get behind a garage, so I just wanted to make sure that...
I didn't want to suggest we were doing alleys. No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions for the applicant?
I guess I have a concern with what you showed, which when I was looking at these in my packet, fortunately or unfortunately, basically you took the subdivision and you superimposed alleys over it. So you didn't really design, I don't see that you designed a subdivision to show that there would be alleys. This is basically just, like I said, you just took the subdivision as was proposed, as the person would like it, and just threw some alleys on top of it. So this basically what you've shown here doesn't work with this layout, but is there an option for other layouts that might make it work that you didn't show or weren't in the packet? That was sort of my question. I said, okay.
Ma'am, I can tell you I probably did about a dozen layouts on that property. And I believe we have at least one other one that was submitted in the record. Pete, I don't know if...
I think under Exhibit 9, there are the various scenarios with text boxes that point to locations within the subdivision.
I believe there were at least 2 others plus the one that you're referencing there. So I think there's 3 layouts that we submitted. We probably did a dozen or so. We just picked 3 of the logical ones to submit. So like most of our projects, we do multiple layouts trying to find something that works best for the code and also for the owner.
So the other layouts showed a different configuration that could have possibly included alley? I guess that's what I'm not understanding.
We did a number of layouts, both with and without alley configurations, but there were no layouts that worked well with the code, that worked well for the site. I mean, the issues with this site, I think, have been well spelled out. You got existing topography constraints around all your perimeter. You're bordering the UGB. You're bordering adjacent properties that are under different ownerships. You're bordering an existing subdivision. You have utility constraints with regard to sewer. If you try to if you try to drop your property grading near the property line, you actually can't serve portions of a project with sewer. So there's some constraints there that kind of dictate how the site's been graded to date and how it needs to be developed.
Okay.
I'd say in addition there's 2 basically platted streets that they determine the configuration of the lots to a certain extent. I mean, you can't do triangular lots or circular ones because you've got a rectangle of streets that you're dealing with.
Site geometry and the way it was set up to meet the city's lot and block pattern, I mean, that was kind of set, and the site's unique in that respect.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. At this time, we will take testimony from, is there a representative from the neighborhood as such? Okay. So we will take individual testimony, and I'll just take those in the order that they were given to me. Jane Davidson.
Jane Davidson and live in Oregon City on Holly Lane. The idea of adding more traffic to Holly Lane does not make sense to me or to anyone I've spoken to about this possibility. Holly Lane is a dangerous road without adding more cars. The speed is always an issue, even with the electric speed signs flashing when the speed exceeds the 40 miles per hour limit. According to the estimate by the traffic engineer, the Crabtree Terrace development will create 1,110 average daily trips to and from this neighborhood. Even if half the number of cars are added to Holly Lane traffic daily, the livability and safety of our street will be adversely affected. There are many accidents already. Why add more traffic to the quotients? Please listen to us this time. Adding neighborhoods around us with easy access to Holly Lane will be hazardous to the health and safety of our families and pets. Please keep our neighborhood safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Donna Gates.
My name's Donna Gates. I live on Holly Lane, and I live on the other end of Holly Lane, so I'm down by Redland Road and real close to Donovan. Like she stated, our traffic is horrendous. And today I encountered...
Please speak into the microphone if you can.
Sorry. I encountered a little old man in a red convertible sports car that when I went to turn into my drive, went around me, and by the time he hit the bridge, he was hitting 60 miles an hour. To say that the wrecks are not that much on the intersections, that might be true. But going around the curve, coming around Holly Lane, there's wrecks all the time. They're going off the road. Another gentleman, my husband was turning into the drive one time, and another gentleman, we had a double yellow line, by the way, so there's no passing there. And another gentleman coming down, I think had his in-law's car, and my husband had a load of wood and had stopped, put his blinker light, and was just getting ready to turn into our driveway when a car was coming 60 miles an hour down and could not stop fast enough and passed him on the wrong side, hit our mailboxes, went down in the canyon, or down in the dip and came back up. So when you say there's no traffic problems, that's not true. I have driven that road now for 24 years, and I see traffic all the time. The school is close to us. Our kids walk to school. Kids no longer can walk to the school because the traffic is so much in there. To get out of my driveway, I mean, I moved out in the country. If I wanted to live on a freeway, I would have bought a house by a freeway. Or if I wanted to live in town, I would have bought a house in town. I really kind of like the country, and I like the road the way it is, and we already have enough. I agree with them. You know, statistics are one thing, but not everything goes into statistics, I have to say. A lot of people don't report their accidents because their insurance goes up and there's a lot of problems, so a lot of times they just bite the bullet. If you go Redland Road, which is where I'm closest to, there's an accident on Redland Road all the time, every year, and they're usually fatal. I see flowers and pots and everything standing at the side of the road on Redland Road because of horrible, horrible accidents. And it's because they're coming down, they're not looking when they go off of Holly Lane, and they make a turn, and there's a blind corner there. Holly Lane, it's a dangerous road, bar none. We cannot take the traffic. We just can't take that much. We've already got the mobile home park up there. They cut through Holly Lane and they go down to Redland Road. And it's getting to the point where it's ridiculous. I don't begrudge anybody from subdividing his property and making money. I would love to do the same thing. But the point is, you're risking a street of people. And it's really sad. And Mr. Mahoney had made the statement of safety for the people. And I don't think we're looking at that at all. And I think that it's something that, I don't know how you would reroute it. They have access to the freeway, but they like to cut down Holly Lane every time. And, you know, I have probably one of the largest pieces of property on Holly Lane. And I can't get out of my driveway. And my driveway is 400 feet back. You know, I mean, I go out and my mailbox sits out there. And there's times when I have to wait because cars are coming down and I go to get my mail out. You don't know if they're going to take you or not. So it's really a very scary thing. And the fact is, you're going to be city and we're county. So we can't put bumps in our road to stop the traffic. And the city don't want to put up stoplights to oblige you. So we're kind of in a catch-22 here. And I don't know what we can do to help each other to get what we want. But I don't want to take away my safety and put a freeway on a 2-lane road in front of my house. I just think that's unfair. And I think that you need to look at some way you're planning or something that's going on needs to be done different. But I just think safety is very important. It's very important to me. And I like my little street, and I like my little house, and I like my property. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
If we could ask citizens to address their comments to the commission, please.
Yes, if people giving testimony could address the commission and please respect the 3-minute time frame, that would be great. Clinton Hodson.
I'm Clinton Hodson, and I live on Holly Lane. And we're hearing that they want to widen Holly Lane in order to get those cars out of that area where they're doing these developments, and that's not reasonable. To widen Holly Lane and to add sidewalks, bike paths on Holly Lane takes land away from the existing property owners, makes Holly Lane more attractive to use instead of going down to the bypass, a 55-mile-an-hour highway. We have to had just recently got the state to reduce the speed on Holly Lane to 40 miles an hour, and it's not patrolled. The estimated 1,100-plus cars a day added to Holly Lane will make a bottleneck on Holly Lane and Redland Road and Abernathy, Redland Road and Highway 213, the bypass. The cars should not have to come over here. They should go down the 55-mile-an-hour freeway and bypass our own home neighborhood streets that are signed 40 miles an hour. The traffic is taking the frontage off our property to widen will decrease the property value and help out the homeowners and help out the home builders without regard to the property owners on Holly Lane. It is not right to penalize existing homeowners in this manner.
Thank you. Is it Kirk Hansen?
Hi, my name is Kirk Hansen. I also live on Holly Lane. Resident there for about 4.5, 5 years now. Built a home right at the Donovan Road, Holly Lane interchange. I too want to appreciate the hard work and effort that the work has been done to develop this neighborhood up above. Respect growth and control, but I think, as some people have already spoken to, there is an imbalance in the county and the city with regard to traffic control and safety. And I want to do what I can respectfully and responsibly do as a citizen in the county, as well as soon to be annexed, I would imagine, into the city. How can that balance be achieved? Strictly on technical merit, I would not approve the change just for balance of control. So, aside from that, I appreciate your opinions and your votes.
Thank you. Sean Weishauer?
My name's Sean Weishauer. I live actually on Sugar Pine. I bought the Sugar Pine residence a year ago. It was the only house in existence there for the first year, and I loved it. I want this variance approved because to build these glorified apartments with these back-to-back garages with alleys, it's not acceptable in a neighborhood like this. I bought this house based on a neighborhood, based on a family dwelling, not to have these structures built. I've seen what these structures can do. I lived near these structures on Coquille Drive by the high school. These are going to be similar structures to what I think is going to be planned to be built there. And they just look horrible. They're not conducive to a development like this, to a neighborhood like this. And I don't live on Holly Lane, so I can't speak for all their traffic issues, but I think the issue at hand is the variance. And to build these kind of structures is going to increase more traffic. The traffic is going to be on the street. They're not going to be parking in these garages. There's no way these cars are going to fit in these garages. I've seen it. Just drive down Glen Oak if you don't believe me. The cars are all on the streets, and that's why I left there. To allow this to happen, I'm going to sell the house, and I don't want this type of development in this neighborhood. That's all I got to say.
If I may, just to clarify, you're supporting the plat without alleys
I do not
because you
want
think
alleys.
the alleys would be a bad.
I think the alleys are a bad
Okay,
idea.
I just want to
Yeah,
clarify
sorry.
that.
Yeah,
Okay.
very bad idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine Kozinski.
Okay, I can lose that.
Before I give my testimony, I actually have 3 more letters from Holly Lane people to turn in.
Tony, I feel like we're under the hot lights getting grilled here.
Wait, just wanted to wake you up.
I'm awake.
Those are the no-dose lights.
These are the no-dose lights? Okay. I brought my sunglasses.
Multi-spec to make us all happier.
Spectrum.
Vitamin D supplement.
I am vitamin D deficient.
Christine Kaczynski, unincorporated Clackamas County. I'm giving you a copy of a letter from the Oregon City School District dated November of 2007 declaring Holly Lane hazardous for the health and safety of students. Ogden Middle School will be adding 8 more additional classrooms for about 200 more students. Most of these will be driven to and from school each day by their parents, creating more traffic. Dangerous and hazardous traffic conditions already exist in the Maple Lane corridor, posted at 45 miles an hour. Past traffic accounts have shown speeds as high as 73 miles per hour for Maple Lane and 91 miles per hour for Holly Lane. Speeding and unsafe travel conditions already exist for these streets. Adding more traffic will greatly exacerbate these severely crippling conditions. Queues on Maple Lane, Thayer, and Holly are becoming greater as the city continues to add development. Isn't new development supposed to create better communities that are safe and livable? In the entire area encompassing Crabtree Terrace, Walnut Grove, and Thayer Road, there is no park, nor is there even a school. Home lots are a mere 3,500 square feet with backyards so small there is not enough room for children to play. Speeding and heavy traffic make it almost impossible for either bikers or walkers to use Maple Lane, Holly, or Thayer, and yet the city continues to develop without providing the necessary infrastructure for these people to live safely. Traffic impact analysis dated May of 2012. On page 2, number 4, the trip distribution shows 75% of traffic going through Maple Lane Thayer and Maple Lane Beaver Creek intersections, even though the analysis states of the 4 intersections, the poorest predicted performances are at Thayer and Maple Lane. The traffic impact analysis dated April of 2010 for the Thayer Road subdivision, which sits right next door to the proposed Crabtree Terrace. All of, the last sentence states, all of these provide connections to Walnut Grove Way and can allow traffic generated by the subdivision to avoid Thayer Road. I question why the avoidance of Thayer Road. Is it because of long queues or because a signal is needed to control traffic in this area? It is even suggested by John Replinger on page 4, where it is stated the analysis suggests a traffic signal or other means of traffic control may eventually be needed here. Recommendations continue stating that Maple Lane Road is less than ideal and queue storage will be barely adequate, and that careful analysis should be conducted for future developments to address both operation of Maple Lane Road and Thayer Road and queuing on Maple Lane. And this is from 2010. Traffic impact analysis dated for Crabtree Terrace 1 in 2007. The poorest performance was calculated during the AM peak hour at the intersection of Maple Lane and Thayer. The Thayer Road approach is calculated to operate at LOSE. I question why the 2007 traffic analysis states the Thayer approach is calculated to operate at LOSE when the 2012 traffic analysis states Thayer and Maple Lane's performance is LOSD. How can Thayer operate at LOSD in 2012 versus LOSE in 2007? Crabtree Terrace number 2 traffic impact study dated March of 2012. Second paragraph from the bottom, Holly Lane has curbs and sidewalks in place intermittently along the street. I wish the city would correct this. Holly Lane has no curbs and no sidewalks and is a narrow street covered with deep ditches on both sides. Holly Lane is a narrow, 2-lane windy country road. The street suffers from unsafe speeding traffic leading to unlivable conditions for the residents, many of whom live in homes situated close to the road. Continuing development from the city is placing these residents in harm's way. Even though the city is not bound legally to consider the plight of these county residents, I believe the city is bound ethically and morally to have notified these residents that within just a few short years, much additional traffic will be placed upon Holly Lane. The city should have reached out to these 500 to 600 residents, giving them the opportunity to comment about the impacts of further development and its effects upon their daily lives.
Thank you. Les Fish.
Thank you. My name's Les Fish. I live on Holly Lane in Oregon City. I'm opposed to the proposed revisions. My primary reason is traffic control and public safety on Holly Lane. As stated numerous times, speeding is a common event on this road. It's narrow. There's no room for a bicycle or for children. I'm personally aware of a neighborhood child who was hit and the participant or the person who hit the child drove away without stopping. This was a minor injury, but nevertheless an injury. I'm also personally aware of a death that occurred on the downhill side just past the corner some years back. There's been numerous other accidents, including 3 patrol cars in pursuit of another individual who was speeding at high speeds that were wrecked right on that corner. This road is extremely dangerous. The traffic that's on it now exceeds any capacity that the road was originally designed for, I'm sure. There's and the impacts to us in the neighborhood who have to try to either enter or enter our own property and or leave that property are severely impacted by these increased traffic controls. I'm an individual who believes in growth. I applaud growth. I think our community needs growth, but I think our community needs growth with thought And I don't believe this is a situation where that thought or the impacts to the people around this growth are going to occur because of this growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comment that I don't have cards for? Sure.
I live near the top of the second hill coming back up from Redland Road. There are cars coming down. Everybody's been talking about how they speed, and they do. There was an accident across the street from me. The whole top had to be cut off to get the person out. There have been motorcycles that have wiped out on the corner. Going down, cars get air over the little hill that's right there. It's just amazing. It looks like a real peaceful street, but it's so dangerous. And I can't think of any way to make that a safer street besides limiting the amount of traffic. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the applicant wish to rebuttal?
We do.
The Colby Lanes are access from the hospital. Anchor Way.
Mr. Kidwell, members of the commission, Mike Robinson, again on behalf of the applicant. This is Todd Mobley with Lancaster Engineering. Todd is our traffic consultant. He's going to testify about the traffic issues, and then I've just got a few remarks.
I'm Todd Mobley with Lancaster Engineering. We conducted the traffic impact study for this development. I'll respond to some of the comments. A few of the traffic volume numbers in the report I think were taken out of context. We heard 1,100 vehicles per day. That was actually from a different section of the report where we were looking at the capacity of Walnut Grove Way to accommodate additional trips from the proposed subdivision before other connections are made out of the neighborhood. So that's actually not a volume on Holly Lane. That's out of a separate section of the report. This subdivision actually adds a pretty small amount of traffic to Holly Lane. We found that for the 30 lots, they'd add 2 a.m. peak hour trips and 3 p.m. peak hour trips to Holly Lane. So the majority of the trips do use Thayer Road and Maple Lane to get out to Beaver Creek. And we found those intersections to operate acceptably. There were some comments there about level of service at the intersection of Thayer and Maple Lane Road. This isn't part of the record, but we actually conducted the analyses in 2007 for the initial phase. So those numbers were our results previously. And in that first subdivision, we looked at the operation of Thayer and Maple Lane. And initially, we calculated the level of service just based on standard methodologies. And we found that what was calculated really didn't reflect what's happening on the ground out there. So we measured delay at the intersection so we could compare that to our calculated value. And we're able to calibrate our model so that what we calculate reflects what happens in the real world. So that's why the discrepancy in level of service there. I did want to point out that Holly Lane is a county facility. Clackamas County was involved in the scoping and review of the traffic impact study as well. So they were in the loop with this. Our traffic impacts on Holly are very minor. We recognize conditions on Holly Lane. It's not built to a current urban standard, but in this case it's also not a city jurisdiction facility, and our impacts there are very minor. That's all of the items I was going to respond to.
Could I ask you a question, please?
Sure.
So we have proposed 30 lots, and let's just say that everybody's going to have 2 cars because they typically do, and there isn't, there aren't any, I understand about the pedestrians, but I'm looking at that from a standpoint of internal circulation. I highly doubt anybody's going to go walking over to Berry Hill or anything from here, Berry Hill Shopping Center from here. And I mean, maybe, but it's not that great.
It's a hike.
Yeah, it's a hike, and it's, I don't think I would do it, but, so you have a lot of people coming and going, and, I don't claim to understand traffic analysis because they don't always, to me, in my head, match up with reality. So did you all do any traffic counts out there? I'm assuming you did?
We did, right. At the 4 study intersections, we
Sections?
did new traffic counts.
And so, I think somebody pointed out that more than likely, I don't know where the school buses go in these areas, and I understand Oregon City might be cutting them. So if everybody's coming and going, it sounds like a lot more trips than what you're suggesting.
Well, the trip generation calculations
Right.
are done based on a manual.
Yeah, I know that.
Trip
ITE
generation
manual,
manual.
yeah.
There you go,
Know
yes.
about that.
But the rates in the manual, for the morning peak hour, it's like 0.7 something trips per dwelling unit. And in the PM, it's just over 1 trip per dwelling unit. So
Maybe it's worth pointing out that you're talking about the peak hour.
Right. So those are in the peak hours. Those are typically like commuter peaks, when people leave to go to work in the morning or they come home in the evening. So that's about 1 trip in each one of those hours per home is what that data shows us. And one trip, if you leave your house and go to the store and come back, that's 2 trips. They're trip ends, actually. So that's what the data shows us. And over the course of a day, it's just under 10 trips per day per unit.
10 trips per day
So-
per unit.
So hopefully that adds a little context, and
Okay.
those numbers are pretty reasonable. I mean, they're they're based on a lot of data. For single-family subdivisions, the amount of data that goes into deriving those rates is one of the most comprehensive ones in the manual. So.
Yeah, I just find that sometimes the manual doesn't really totally and adequately reflect what people really do. It's kind of taking the average and it's sort of balancing it out, and I just try to put myself in that situation, knowing that I've got 2 vehicles, I've got 1 person that doesn't drive that has to get picked up and taken here and there all the time. So I'm making a heck of a lot more trips because I know hi, I need to be picked up. Hi, can you take me here?
But the other side of it is
I'm a chauffeur.
The other side of it is I make
Yeah.
2 trips, 1 out and 1 back in, and then I don't go anywhere. So
I'm happy
we
to say
balance.
that in my neighborhood, the peak hour for my 2 teenage sons is 3 in the afternoon when they finally wake up. So
There you
they're
go.
not contributing to the problem in the morning.
But they might be later. Yeah.
Oh, I hope not.
No, I don't mean.
Oh,
that
I
kind-
hope they
not
work.
that kind of.
Oh,
a
yeah,
problem.
thank you.
Not kind of the coming and the going. Okay.
I had a question for you while you're up here. Is in your traffic analysis, did you evaluate from the current Crabtree development which direction people are tending to turn? Are they turning toward Beaver Creek, or are they turning toward Holly Lane?
We did, yeah. The majority of those trips are, the updated traffic counts that we did include all of the houses that are built in Crabtree number 1. And they did show that the majority of the trips are going, like here in the morning, there were 63 trips leaving Walnut Grove Way out onto Maple Lane Road. 60 of those were turning left towards Beaver Creek, and only 3 were making a right.
Why is that?
That's just the route
Why do they
that
go that direction?
Well, it's the route that best serves the site. The destinations to Beaver Creek Road and Highway 213 and other destinations in Oregon City.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant?
That's part of it.
You have any more presentations?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Not much.
No.
No.
Kidwell, members of the commission, Mike Robinson again. Let me say, first of all, I thank you to the folks who stayed late tonight and testified. I understand there's sincere concern about traffic problems, and I don't want to minimize those problems. If I lived on Holly Lane, I would probably have the same problems, but in defense of the applicant, I will say 2 things, one of which has already been said by Todd. Holly is a county facility. There's nothing, or there's probably not a lot that the city of Oregon City can do about that. It sounds like it is typical about, it can, and I don't minimize the problems, but it sounds somewhat typical on the edge. You've got a rural area that's close to urban development. It wasn't, that road was never meant for urban standards. They're probably right. It's probably not a safe road to walk on. And as you get more nearby development, you necessarily get more trips. And I appreciate that. I will say that is not this applicant's responsibility, and that's not meant to be harsh or uncaring. It's simply the way the approval criteria work. We're not responsible for fixing problems that existed before us and will continue to exist after us, regardless of whether this subdivision is built or not. Doesn't mean we're not sympathetic, but I mean, all of you are involved in the policy issues of urban governance and development. You've got two jurisdictions, different levels of roads, different standards. You can't solve it on the back of a single subdivision. So one issue is it's a county road, not a city road. The second thing I want to say, and I don't know where this came from, but it's clearly not right. The application that before you is not going to generate 1,100 cars a day. The application that's before you is estimated, and I shouldn't say cars, trips, it's estimated to generate 288 trips a day. Now, if you included the 81 lots in Phase 1, which is already approved, plus this one, you might get to that number. But what's before you tonight is a 30-lot subdivision that will generate about 288 trips. And I appreciate the questions that Commissioner McGriff asked. I have those same questions myself. The only way you can do this is to have some constant standard that you look at. And yeah, some houses are going to have 20 trips a day. I mean, we have a couple across the street from us that have quads. They have 5 kids total. So I'm going to move in 6 years because I don't want to be there when all those kids have cars. But our neighbor is a retired couple. And if they leave their house twice a day, it's surprising. So I think Todd's right. It sort of balances out. And again, you have to rely on, the ITE is what Todd relies on. It's what John Replinger relies on. It's your standard of evidence. And it all goes to the level of service, which is the sole measure for does this street work or not. If we broke it, we have to fix it. I mean, that's the rule. But we're not breaking anything. It operates at level of service D or, really in all cases, much better than that. So first of all, we're not creating 1,100 trips. Secondly, someone said we're widening Holly Lane. Now, were that true, we might be fixing a problem for them because you can't just widen travel lanes. You have to do other things. We are not touching Holly Lane. The only street improvements we'll make will be the internal streets and hopefully no alleys. But we're not doing anything on Holly. So I'm sympathetic to everything they had to say. I hear this in all my land use hearings. For such a proud state with such a good land use tradition, we're really not very good at fixing this edge problem. But having said all that, it doesn't go to the approval criteria. It's not created by this applicant. I'm sympathetic, but there's nothing that we can do, nor is there anything that you should require us to do, and you shouldn't make a decision based on that. Secondly, I want to note that of the, we had eight folks that testified, well, 7. Ms. Davidson testified twice. We had 7 folks that testified. The only person who didn't live on Holly Lane was our neighbor in Phase 1, and he supports the variance. Everyone else who testified lived on Holly Lane. None of them had anything to say about the variance. So all we heard was, again, with all due respect to our neighbors, bad traffic problems. We understand that. This application will not make it worse, however. Holly Lane, and you can look at the TIA, page 4, figure 12. Holly Lane takes about 10% of the trips from this subdivision. Everybody else goes the other direction because that's where you go to shop and work and go to school for the most part. Now, maybe I got this wrong. I thought I heard Mrs. Kaczynski say that 75% of the trips went up Maple and Holly. If you look at figure 12 in the TIA, it's 25% of the trips. That's where they go. The tractor is the other direction for the most part. In the morning, this subdivision will add morning peak hour 6 trips to Holly Lane, and in the afternoon 8 trips. If there is a problem there, and I certainly think there is based on what I've heard our neighbors say, it's already there. 6 trips in the morning and 8 trips in the afternoon are not going to do anything to it. I mean, reality is this little subdivision is not going to create a problem. So all of these good folks testified about this issue. And it doesn't have anything to do with the subdivision. It's not relevant to the approval criteria. The sole standard that's before you is does it meet level of service D? It does. John Replinger says it does. Our traffic study says it does. There's not a competing traffic study. None of them testified about the variance, with the exception of our neighbor, who would like to see the same kind of subdivision that he lives in and that he thought would be over here be built. So I guess, Chair Kidwell, that's how I'd like to end our testimony tonight. By the way, we're going to waive our right to final written argument. I don't think there's anything we could add to the record. You all have asked questions, and we've tried to answer them, and hopefully we've done it well. But I don't think that keeping the record open would really serve any of us very well, so we're not going to ask for that. But I want to end it this way. I recognize that you should be stingy in granting variances. If you grant too many, you effectively disrupt your own code. So we come to our variance application with that understanding. But I think we did, I was going to say, if I don't say so myself, I think we did a good job of trying to address the staff issues. That's why we took an extra month before we came before you. And as a result of that, your staff recommended approval. And I know they don't do that with every variance criteria. We carefully addressed each of the 6 criteria. We don't have any adverse impact on the surrounding property owners. We have an equal or better impact than providing alleys would. We think it's better. There's not a traffic impact. We think pedestrians will do just as well. We think there's plenty of on-street parking and off-street parking provided. We're not doing the maximum density. We're doing wider lots. And most importantly, we're keeping faith. We heard someone talk tonight about ethical requirements. And as a lawyer, I usually, you can imagine I don't say that word very often, I deal in approval criteria. But I will say, I think this is a case where it is fair to the people who bought in Phase 1 to give them what they expected in Phase 2. You have to find that we met the variance approval criteria to do so. I think we've given you the evidence to make that finding. So we hope that you will approve it. We would appreciate it if you would. We think you can. And that's all we have to say tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we'll close the public record. Does the commission have discussion? Questions of staff?
I guess discussion and question of staff and comment to the audience. To the audience member that wanted to ask a question, I just wanted to clarify that this is a legal proceeding and it has to go in certain stages. Just like in the court of law, you can't jump up and start questioning a witness because of what you heard them say. That's the way the process goes, and so that's why the answer was no, you couldn't ask them a question. And it's a statewide legal requirement. It's not something that we impose. So
could they ask staff a question?
So anyway, with that, a couple of questions. Either Peter or Tony, whichever one. Is Holly Lane, I know it's a county facility, but is it in the hamlet of Beaver Creek?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the hamlet's boundary extends up to Redland.
Okay. So are we aware of anything that that government jurisdiction is doing to improve Holly Lane?
I'm not aware of anything.
Okay. Well, that doesn't mean that they're not doing something. It's another government entity that could be doing something about it that we can't. So, okay. And I
guess I should say I believe that the transportation system plan for Clackamas County is open right now for review, if I recall. You know, once again, I sympathize with the testimony brought forward. If this was in Oregon City and folks were speeding down Lynn Avenue at 50 miles an hour, we would have the ability to deal with it.
They do.
And we have. I hope that the passion and the issues that were brought up tonight to this body were brought up to Clackamas County commissioners. They have the ability to affect change out there. You know, it's in Clackamas County Law Enforcement Enhancement District. You know, Oregon City Police can't go out there and enforce the speed limits. We can't, in our TSP, go put in a street widening project outside of the city limits. It's difficult. I understand the concerns, and you do have this urban-rural where they meet. How does it function? Who makes the improvements? You know, you do see these negative impacts. But these are this is a question and a concern that we hear, we understand. Our ability to change that is difficult when you have the Oregon land use system that we have, where we've identified areas where urbanization will occur. But speed, whether it happens in the city or in the county, is an enforcement issue. There are certain design things you can do, but in the end, people will speed, and unless that is enforced, it will continue. So I would just hope that, wish you could take the tape tonight and send it over to the county commissioners, because there are legitimate concerns.
Sorry. I would also add that when we did the Park Place concept plan process, which was, a long process of engagement, and the urban growth boundary stops just south of Morton Road. I think that's the one, but it doesn't extend to Holly Lane intersection with Maple Lane. If it did, we would have been able to do some conceptual transportation planning for future improvements to Holly Lane. As it was, we did conceptual transportation planning for only a portion of Holly Lane, none of which can be realized until annexation occurs and is approved by the voters of Oregon City. So it takes annexation followed by zoning followed by development in order to get urban level type street improvements that meet city standards.
And that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to meet, because we still have South End and Central Point, which are still inside the city limits, but still county roads because of multiple things. So yeah, and I guess would just kind of say, I do recognize that everything that was said about speeding on Holly is true, because I'm guilty of most of it. Not recently, but I did happen to help repair the fence at the Holly Lane Maple Lane one when my friend drove in the fog right through the intersection and into the field. So I know it happens. I have friends that are right at the top of the break of the hill when I was in high school. So yeah, it needs fixing. But in relation to what is in front of us, which is a subdivision, and it's only in front of us because of the variance question. And in relation to that, I don't see any difficulty with the variance. Alleys just don't seem to be appropriate. One of the things we're trying to do is have a cohesive community plan. We're also trying to avoid the ticky-tacky little boxes situation like in Southern California, but I don't think that's what's happening here. So I don't see a problem with the application as in front of us within the boundaries that we're able to work. So.
County's saying they need to improve Holly Lane.
Sorry, sir. Sorry, we can't. I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards. We can't run a hearing that way.
Public testimony's been closed, sir. Denise?
I'm going to pass for the moment because I'm still thinking.
Zach?
I'm real sensitive to the fact of the traffic problems, and just cutting it close. We're here and only looking at this because of the alley situation and that variance request. If it wasn't for the code change in 2009, we would have never seen this. So in that context, the development works better without the alleys. And I agree with the staff says.
Okay. Well, with regard to the zoning and density, this property was annexed and zoned as an R3.5. Lot size and future impacts under the worst-case scenario were reviewed at that time and dealt with. So once you zone the property, it follows that the subdivision occurs with making some additional tweaks and adjustments to that. As far as the traffic goes, the applicant has met the burden of proof through their traffic study, which was confirmed by the city's traffic engineer. And I guess the biggest conflict that I had walking into this was the variance, because I think it's good urban form to try doing alleys and different kinds of traffic calming strategies and things like that to provide better access and better looking subdivisions. But I think the grading may have painted us into a corner regarding our ability to meet criteria of a variance, or find that the criteria have not been met because the topography and some of the physical aspects of the site have already been, the table's already been set for a certain kind of subdivision design. So from that standpoint, and the fact that I just don't think that it would be very good urban form to have alleys in this setting, I just don't think it would make sense to push that as far as the variance is concerned. So I would also support the applicant's variance application as well.
And I'm ambivalent, because what I see here is is the property to, well, I don't know, what direction is that, Tony? This property up here? North. There's the potential for that property owner to come in and say, well, the lots are already set, the streets are already set, so I have to have a variance too. So here we are setting a precedent for this to continue on adjacent properties. And then I also take a look at this, which really goes out there, and I know this is conceptual, but it shows a lot pattern that may or may not be appropriate for what the City of Oregon City's code looks at. And it's, you know, UGB 3.5, got some of that. So that's where my ambivalence comes in, is that I guess part of what I'm looking at as well is and I'm not blaming you, Pete, but I read something in your staff report that I highlighted. It says the applicant's future preferred lot pattern size and building design is self-imposed burden that is not binding on the city, and that both the applicant and the city are aware that prior approval of a grading permit for the site does not create a basis for approval of a variance from alley requirements, nor does it relieve the applicant of compliance with the code. And anybody may apply for a grading permit on residential properties provided that it complies with the applicable criteria in Oregon City Municipal Code, Chapter 1528. And then you proceed to go through and give and take on the variance criteria. So that's where my ambivalence comes into this.
If I can, I guess my response to that would be that that's true, but if, you know, that's like saying we changed the code to not allow craftsman-style houses. They all have to be Victorian, so now you have to finish your development with Victorian-style houses. They're going to look different. They're going to face differently. The neighborhood is going to change because of that, and I don't think that that's appropriate, given that this was an in-progress development. Now, you're correct in what you said, the surrounding neighborhoods that haven't developed, but they're going to walk in and knowing that they're going to have to come up with a design with alleys. You know, the grading was even done prior to the code change. It wasn't like they graded it and hoping to, you know, backdate the code change. It was completed in advance. So I think it needs to be looked at as an existing topography, not a created topography. And so from that's one of the reasons
But it is created.
I understand.
I get it. I understand. People do this all the time. They take a risk in anticipation of something that they may or may not want to do, and that's part of the risk.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would concur with Damon with regard to this development really being a development that was anticipating that they would be allowed to use the same ground rules for their second phase as that they applied to the first phase, and whether it was right for them to go ahead with grading based on those assumptions or not. The fact of the matter is the grading that they performed at the time that they did it was in conformance with the criteria that was in place at that time. So the rules kind of got changed in the middle of the game for this developer, this property owner. With the criteria that we have before us, the variance is really the only matter that is relevant at this point. And the continuity of the development without alleys, to me, makes a lot more sense for this particular development. And I would submit that the next developer needs to look at the existing conditions with the code that's in place at the time that they come forward, should another development in an adjacent area take place. With regard to the Holly Lane traffic issue, I'm really sympathetic, and I have to say that prior to the time that the Highway 213 bypass was built, I kind of alternated between Holly Lane and Maple Lane to get out of Oregon City. And it was just, that was the most convenient way for me to get down the hill to 205. And that's exactly the reason I asked the question of the traffic person about which direction people are turning. And my perception is that the reason why that road is dangerous is not because of the traffic volume, it's a speed. And even when I thought I was driving pretty reasonable, I was probably doing 50 miles an hour down that hill. It's a very easy hill to drive down quickly. And I think the speed, and one lady testified about people getting air, and I think that would be easy to do going down that hill. Being sympathetic, though, really has no bearing on this decision based on the traffic volumes that we've heard about. And I agree with Tony that this is a matter that ought to be brought to the county commission, and I would even suggest as going so far to document speeding and report that to the sheriff's department, because that's a violation of speed limits that are posted out there. I don't believe that we have any authority over the way people drive outside of the city limits. And as Tony has noted, if that was a city road, we would have a jurisdiction there that we could seek city enforcement of the way that those roads are being driven. I believe that this variance is consistent with the development that is adjacent at Crabtree Terrace 1, and I would be prepared to support that.
I have a question for Jennifer, if I may. When the criteria talks about the minimum variance that would alleviate the hardship, since we've got attorneys in the room, what are we talking about in terms of minimum? Because this, to me, is really the maximum variance, because they're asking for complete, they can't, and for for the reasons they've specified, they cannot meet the standard. So it's really not the minimum. There's no part of the standard that they can meet.
Can you give me a page number?
It's on page 33 under B on the staff report.
I think if there was a proposal from the Planning Commission to ask, the standard, the interpretation of the standard and whether the evidence meets the standard is up to the Planning Commission. And I think you heard the attorney for the applicant state that he hopes you don't require an alley, and you saw some evidence showing that superimposition of the alleys and those various design alternatives. And if the commission wants to go that route, then you could approve that and assume that because of the evidence in the record that there is an example of this alley going through, and then the applicant could then do what it chooses to do. Maybe it's going to appeal your decision or not, but
Okay. I'm sure it's probably been debated many times at LUBA, but just, that helped, thank you.
You know, I would just throw one other thing into our conversation. Where a development has the alley built in from the beginning, you can use that as an asset to the development. In this case, it appears to me that trying to squeeze an alley in, the result of that is going to just tighten the development up. Because they're already at the minimum threshold of density, so they can't reduce the number of lots. So for them to put an alley in there,
Well, they could, but
squeeze an alley.
it could be some financial consequences, which is not.
Well, no, they can't have any less than 30 lots. So the impact of putting an alley in means that the lots are going to be smaller, which basically just means all of your units all the buildings will be closer together, one way or the other.
It's like imposing a 3.0 standard on them.
Yeah, I'm not sure how, I don't understand your logic of
Okay.
they can't have less than 30 lots.
That's the...
Maybe to make it financially
No,
feasible,
no.
they can't.
That's the... Pete just said...
Oh,
That's
minimum
the
density, okay, all right.
They-
Okay, well, you didn't say
they-
that.
Yeah,
You-
minimum
density.
density is 30
Right.
for that site.
Right.
They could, as Damon pointed out, have as many as 40, but they can't be below 30.
Right, okay.
And in compliance. So they're already as tight as they
can
can
be.
get. Putting an alley in there just means the lot sizes will have to shrink.
Okay,
Okay?
super.
We have any more discussion?
Nope.
I have
Make a
a
motion.
couple of questions for staff. One, Pete, the letter you got from Replinger, that's
in-
Exhibit B.
Email, yeah.
Does that satisfy your recommendation 16?
Yes, it does.
So we could strike that recommendation, or would you just want to keep it and then just submit this as the answer?
I would recommend striking it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and then the other recommendation or condition of approval 9, the police fee. We don't have an SDC for police, correct?
Correct.
So this is just a voluntary fee that the, okay.
It's part of the annexation
Don't like it.
agreement for that
I
territory.
understand.
You don't want that fee.
Yeah, I completely think that that's just blackmail, and I don't like it, and I use that word intentionally.
You said it.
Madam Attorney.
You said it on the record before.
That's right. So,
Yeah.
I'm more than willing for somebody else to propose, because I am assuming that 9 is something that everybody else wants.
So
So,
you just go ahead and.
Do we have a motion?
I'll give it a try. I move that the Planning Commission approve TP 1201 and approve variance 1202, the 30-lot subdivision with the variance request, with the alley, or without the alley in this case, with condition number 16 stricken, because it's been satisfied with the new evidence.
I'll second.
Can I ask you a point of procedure? Since you've combined these two applications, we have a request for a variance. Can we vote on that separately and then vote on the subdivision, or do they have to be together?
We've consolidated.
Okay, that's
two
the,
applications
that's okay.
to the highest one, but usually the subdivision would be a place
Two, right. The variances, yes. Okay. Okay, that's what I thought.
All right. Commissioner Maybe.
no, I'm not chair anymore.
You've fallen so far.
I, with the exception of condition number 9. And
Well,
approve everything except condition 9.
you can't. You
Then-
have to go with the motion.
You can't do that.
You can ask for an amendment, but I don't know.
Yes.
You want an amendment?
You want to amend it?
That is so.
Fine.
He's doing it as a protest.
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin,
Aye.
Commissioner Espy,
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff.
I'm voting no on the variance and yes on the subdivision. I know. Okay, then it's a no vote. I apologize. I'm not convinced by the variance. The
Okay.
subdivision is
That's a
fine.
no. Yeah. And Chair Kidwell.
Aye.
And I knew it was going to pass, so.
Carries 4-1.
Thank you very much for your time.
By the way, audience, thank you again for
Thank
coming
you
in.
for staying, everybody.
Double overtime. We got one.
Right.
Turn it off yet? We have the executive, we have the director's report.
Okay.
Are you adjourning the meeting?
Mr. Director, you're on.
Tony has wise things to say.
I'm drawing a blank.
Make it quick.
Yeah. I honestly don't have anything.
The county
to
has
update.
concluded their purchase of the property across the
That
river.
is true.
Yes, that's the only thing I saw.
Yeah, the county did buy the Westland property that closed, I believe, last
The Westland
Friday.
Blue Heron.
The Westland Blue Heron property, yes.
So they got their sewer outfall and all that good stuff.
Correct. That's all I have.
All right.
So Tony, I think you have a very tough job, and we have these county-city interfaces, and that's been happening since the beginning of time.
Edge development.
Is there some way to...
Excuse me, folks, could you please step outside?
Is there some way that we could, as a planning commission, write a letter to the county, copy to the planning department to basically say this is going to continue and that there needs to be some way? Because I understand what they're saying. I know we can't do anything about it, but what I think they're seeing is the cumulative impact. You know, and I know you know this. You know all of this. It's just, it's just one on top of the other. And I don't drive Holly Lane often personally, but I do Maple Lane because it's a way to get down to my in-laws that live out in the hinterlands. And I can tell you over the last 25 years, I don't know what people are doing, but it's the speed. I don't understand why they want to drive that fast. And the one lady mentioned about the number of flower things and crosses. There's a whole lot of more on this street now than there used to be when I started going out there 25 years ago. And it's scary. I have people riding my bumper when I'm going down Maple Lane because I'm not going, speeding, because it's not a safe road to speed on. There's shoulders, and it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and you have the same thing on Redland Road.
Oh, Redland, yeah. Oh my God.
People want to drive 10 to 15 miles above this posted speed limit, and they get up on your bumper, and all of a sudden you look up and there's a car like 10 feet behind
in your
you,
back
and
seat.
they got their lights flashing, and you're going, what?
And Redland has those little hills where if a car gets down in the bottom of it and you're coming, you can't see them. And
The
I see
sight
people-
distance isn't very good.
I see people passing there.
That's about it. That's
Same on
about
Holly,
it.
there's a couple of swales where you just disappear.
That's the problem, but then
Well,
people
I don't know if it's appropriate, but I would
our
support
man is because
what
we didn't,
Denise is suggesting, that maybe we could write just a letter of concern that we've heard testimony about the safety and traffic concerns on Holly Lane, and we would request that they take a look at that condition and see if there's anything that can be done to mitigate that.
And like I said, it may be appropriate to submit something like that. I think that their TSP is open.
Their TSP?
I believe it is. I think theirs is, Clackamas County's is open.
I heard that like 2 weeks ago, but I didn't get an update.
Well, I can't imagine they've adopted it since.
But,
It
it's
just
going to
takes a while.
continue to happen. I remember hearing about it on Myers Road, it's Beaver Creek Road, it's Glen Oak Road, it's Henrici Road. I mean, it's where, we have these
fringe.
conflicts. We can't do anything, and they're not doing anything, but we're not having a conversation about it. It's going to continue to be an issue, and then they walk away and frustrated because we can't do anything.
And the concept planning process, it starts out intending to help, and then people get drawn into the
other
idea that
parts.
it's a development plan and not a conceptual transportation plan.
Yeah.
And that distinction is not always clear to people. And
Well,
so,
and I understand the concern that, this is only a 30-lot development. And so you say, well, that's only 300 trips. But when you add this one and the next one and the next one and the next one over a period of, 6 or 8 years, now you've got, 2,000 trips.
The death of 1,000 cars.
Well, what makes it hard for us, though, as well, being on the edge, is that Maple Lane and Beaver and 213, the investment we needed to make wasn't to serve the city. Okay, so there are extensive public infrastructure, city tax dollars, and system development charges being spent to accommodate level of service from Redland, Malign. I mean, so it's a two-way equity
It
here.
is, it is.
And that's the hard part.
213, really, I think,
also over capacity
that
already.
relieved a lot of pressure on people going down the hill on Maple Lane and Holly Lane.
And 7th and Washington.
Because those streets
For a
were
while it did.
the major way to get down the hill before the bypass. But I can see where these neighborhoods are starting to creep a little bit closer to that point where it's almost as easy to go down Holly Lane as it is to get up to 213.
I have a feeling that if you did a traffic study on Holly Lane, you're going to find that it has plenty of capacity.
Yeah.
It's a speeding issue.
It's
I don't think
perception. It's
capacity.
perception. It's
That's when
perception.
people
Street
were
design and speed.
buzzing by your mailbox at 60 miles an hour, and you're going, wow, what was that?
Yeah. Yeah. When my son was in high school, he had a friend who lived on Holly Lane, and I tell you, I did not like having to go over there and get him because it's crazy, very crazy.
Yeah. Joe Merrick from the county transportation department said he grew up on Holly Lane, and it was bad back then.
Yeah.
I went to Ogden and I teach at Ogden, so I see it all the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's not. Unfortunately, it's not getting better. And I think, Charles, you mentioned the creep. What's happening is that as traffic gets more congested on 213, people are looking for shortcuts. They're looking for shortcuts to go some other place instead of,
That's
where
why
we
I went from level of service E to level of service D, because people said, I'm not waiting it there. And
Yeah.
Are we done?
Thank you.
We're adjourned.
Oh, I finally was able to log out.
Yeah,
It's the first time in like